Hey everybody, welcome to Imperial 80s. It's good to be with you today.
Good morning. Good morning. How y'all doing?
I got my coffee ready finally. So
You were able to get coffee in between being on the Remix morning show and getting over here.
I was literally while Air Doctor was doing his like mixes, making my coffee.
Yeah,
Like-
good job. Good job.
Right
Good
on.
job.
It's good to see everybody in the chat. Good to see people making the migration over from all the remixers coming over. This is great. We're excited to have you, Renee. Everybody should be. I'm sure everybody does, but if you do not, you should follow the work that she and Jared Ball do over on Saturdays with Renee, and then dropping in on the Remix Morning Show with the Black Liberation Media folks. And somebody asked you if it's Folgers, Renee. Oh
oh
wait, that
heck
was the wrong
no.
one.
No.
that that might be the John Milius coffee of choice, though.
It might be. It
So
might be. No, actually,
Mm.
I am a bougie coffee drinker, and I had to figure it out because coffee was way too expensive, and so I bought a little coffee maker, a little drip coffee maker, and I found a roaster that has like this caramel flavor where I go food shopping. So that's what I'm using right now, but it's really
right on.
good. It's really good, and I put cinnamon in my coffee, so that does everything. It's all the things.
I am also a coffee snob, so I can relate. I will say so. People, as you're coming in, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel if you are not already. Support the Patreon, um, and and of course share it. Like, let folks know that we're doing this. This should be fun. I know a lot of people, will be have seen Red Dawn, were traumatized by Red Dawn, had their life ruined for many years by Red Dawn, or perhaps were inspired by it. And yeah, we'll have something for all of you today. And
Yeah, yeah.
This was
Apologies somewhat to anyone, including Renee, who had
I,
not maybe seen the film before.
I had not.
Yeah, a
No,
comrade
yeah.
on IG did a post of them about to watch it, and I had to write "I'm sorry" to them. So, but all jokes aside, at the same token, there is a way that I think it's an awareness of this movie, and to me, in some ways, even beyond it, its maker, I think, is a real important thing when we're thinking about, because we'll talk largely just about the movie and the historical context, but there will be some discussion of some things that have kind of passed on through his legacy that you still see now. One of them even goes all the way up to our president. And and one of them goes all the way up to our president. So yeah, Milius, we'll get into it in Red Dawn. There's a lot there, but Renee, you were going to say something.
I was just gonna say that this was a full setup, y'all. A full setup. First of all, first of all, and Tume texts me like, "Oh, I'm gonna do this movie thing. You want to do this movie thing?" And he knows I'm not gonna tell him no. Like, if he asked me to do something, I'm gonna do it. And then all of a sudden it was, "Well, we gonna be on millennials," and I'm like, "This is setup. Y'all ain't tell me this." This is gonna be like
Well,
a
it all
full.
happened very fast.
It did.
In defense, yeah.
Right.
But the
And then the
reason why, go
second
ahead,
setup is
go
that
ahead.
I hadn't seen the movie. And so I wasn't sure if I hadn't seen the movie because it has all the 80s classics actors and actresses. And so, you see the picture and you're like, I mean, maybe I saw it. I don't remember. But as I watched it, I was like, I have definitely never seen this movie. I've never seen it. I don't remember 1 second of this movie. So there's no shot that I've ever seen it. It is brutal. Brutal. So thank you.
I didn't know that. I did see it. I don't think I saw it probably until the early 90s, so it may not have hit quite the same for me as it would have for the generation of folks that grew up and watch it in 84, because by that time the USSR was not around anymore too. And so it's interesting to watch in that context, knowing that the USSR would fall soon after the film is made, and the kind of how mighty, you could say, the kind of Soviet war machine is presented in this film, in comparison. Not that they didn't have a substantial army, of course they did, but this idea that it was a project that was actually going to be globally expanding around the world into the United States directly, as opposed to one that was actually opening up to the West, which would lead to the liberalizing in its own way, and kind of on its last legs, unfortunately, I would say. But um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I saw it in the 80s, but I feel like I rewatching it. It's another one of those movies that I was like, did I ever watch it from beginning to end in one sit? I remember it being on cable a lot. And you know how it was when you watch a movie on like Cinemax or HBO. You'd only see you never see like the beginning or something like that, like the first 20 minutes. So when I first saw the very, very, very beginning of the film, it was very foreign in my memory. I didn't remember that. A lot of the stuff in the middle, the ambushes, were very like familiar to me. And I didn't watch it since, even when I took some time some years ago to kind of learn more about John Milius. I was so turned off by him. I was like, you know what? I don't know if I really want to sit through this movie. But then when the series came to my head, I said, yeah, I mean, there's no way to kind of ignore this film, especially because there is a real big cult around this film, not just amongst the right wing, but the kind of action movie liberal, camp crowd. They really get into this movie in many ways, even ones who would consider themselves liberal or anti-American meddling. I wouldn't say anti-imperialist would get into this film, but people who consider themselves good-natured, or the politics that Milius believes in and that this film embraces. They wouldn't say they embrace those politics, but this kind of irony crowd who can say, oh, well, but it's just a campy movie about a what if. They get into this movie and they have a huge love for this movie. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I think it's time. And the reason why I thought Renee, I was like, I did remember there was lots of historical references that are done poorly, and I know Renee's grade A researcher, so I was like, you know what, Renee's gonna want to dig into this. And I also was just curious, what's Renee, once you figured out like who this person was who made this movie, just what you would want to go dig up and find.
So what Entume just told y'all is he straight up picked me up and threw me headfirst down the rabbit hole.
Yep.
That's what he just told on himself. And you really did, because I spent so much time, I'd make a note and then I'd have to go figure it out, right? And so even the sheet, I don't know if you looked at the difference between the sheet when I sent it and now. Right?
This morning I did.
Because I had to finish all my going through and figuring stuff out. But this is, first of all, the movie's terrible. It's awful. It's a terrible movie. It's not even well done. I watched the thing that you sent Jared, and at the end he was like, it was great acting. I was like, no, it wasn't. The acting's terrible. The whole thing is terrible. So somebody in the chat was like, I couldn't find it for free, so I didn't pay for it. Good, don't.
Yeah, I mean, we could go ahead, Jay.
I was just gonna say, do you want to start us off and to me with kind of some of the?
Yeah, I kind of want to do I agree. Let's do a little bit of a setup of the movie, like the time frame and all that type of stuff, like kind of important things. So, Red Dawn was made or released in 1984. It's Milius, directed by John Milius. John Milius, the credits that he has are pretty big. It is not his first film. It's like his fifth film, But he was able to kind of do this film after a film that I think we all know called Conan the Barbarian. Conan the Barbarian is like one of really his big super hit. He did some other things like Dillinger. He was a writer on Apocalypse Now, which probably will come up a little bit. I kind of want to mention that at some point. He's also really famous for the Dirty Harry movies, having written stuff for that, like one of his big and Jaws. He didn't write the script, but he gave significant portions to Jaws. So Milius had kind of became a Hollywood legend in a kind of a way, as a kind of script doctor, or the guy who would make your movie like better, or more edgy, or more human, or more interesting, give it more edge. But the other thing that was known about Milius is that he had pretty right-wing politics. It was a kind of thing that was known throughout Hollywood at that time, through people who were his peers, which also just makes an interesting kind of thing, because you had a lot of these guys from Lucas to Coppola who spent a lot of time with him, who also claimed to be, liberal or anti-right-wing, or even pro movements that were against right-wing, but they had a real loving relationship with John Milius. So he kind of kept this, life within Hollywood, though Milius will also then say his right-wing politics got him blacklisted and so forth and so on. And there's a lot we could probably will say about that, maybe more towards the end. So the film is also written by a guy named Kevin Reynolds. Reynolds was a screenwriter for a long time. People will know his name because he directed one of the Robin Hood movies, I think Prince of Thieves, but he ended up also directing Prince of Thieves. And then he directed Waterworld, which, if people of my generation remember, was infamous because it was the highest budget movie at the time ever made, and it was a massive financial failure. It almost broke Hollywood. Waterworld.
It did. And you know what? Listen, and I liked Waterworld. I'm not even gonna lie.
I don't remember it. Actually.
Now, I haven't watched it in a really long time, so I will say the caveat of I liked it when I saw it back then, when it came out, before I started really looking at how these movies work. But the premise
is not good, Renee.
I'm sure it's not. But the premise of the world's been taken over by water and people are trying to find land, that was what stuck in my head as as an interesting concept. So let me not say the movie was good. The concept behind the movie was a good one. I'll save myself by putting it that way.
And that's interesting because, Reynolds, this seems to be a theme for him, these kinds of end of the world type of things, or world in crisis, or apocalyptic or pre-apocalyptic. So the original Red Dawn script was called 10 Soldiers. It was more like a Lord of the Flies kind of movie, where they, there is an invasion. The young people are forced to kind of go into an area, and it's more like a Lord of the Flies. What happens? Apparently in the older script, they kind of eat each other. So it's more like I mean, figuratively, they more destroy each other in this kind of, Lord of the Flies re-envisioning. But the studio saw it and they were like, oh, that's cool. But another thing that was happening right at the same time was the rise of the Brat Pack and teen movies and teen stars. And you had movies like The Outsiders, which was really popular, which is significant to this movie because two of its stars. And then another film, which we've just talked about here on the Imperial 80s, Rambo. And the studio was like, yo, why don't we do a teen Rambo? Right? And they were like, yeah, so they took this script and they had many people they were thinking about, but it eventually, through a lot of different moves, landed to John Milius. And Milius reworked the film more in his image. But there were some other things. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't want to get too much into the other people wanted to, they could. There's a lot of back and forth of what decisions were made by whom. Milius has claimed that the film was even crazier when his version, and it's a lot of back and forth. A lot of, I think, some of it I think is apocryphal. Some of it I think is BS. But there's a lot of stuff that was in the film. There are a couple of key things that are not in the film that we will have to talk about because they are suggested. But yeah, and then this film. So what the film is about, and then I'll lay it out to the others to kind of jump in if I don't have any other like back notes. But no, so the film is basically a reimagining or a kind of what if certain political things went a different way and we entered into World War III. And I'm going to say this is because this is something I think is important. Yes, it's with the USSR, but what I forgot was how much nations like Cuba are involved, Nicaragua are involved. I mean, Cuba in many ways through one person, which we'll talk about, played by Ron O'Neal. You heard my gasp there. Kind of in many ways leads it somewhat in the film, though it is very obscured. Also, Mexico is a huge figure in the film. There's a kind of what I would call a communist coalition. So it becomes this kind of, at least for me, a coalition of communism, but under the idea that the communism is this Leninist thing, and we only really get into Leninism by a kind of like, image. We'll talk about that too. This global, like, global, or these countries have now bandied together to fight against the US and overtake it. And the US has few allies. We'll get into it that Europe has, forgotten about the US or stayed out. And then also, but China is involved, but not seen, which we'll definitely get into at some point because that's really interesting. But that's really the setup of the movie. Jay here. Yeah, let's go through like the top of the cards again. I think this is really important. And if anybody, Renee or Jay, want to add anything to these cards, I think this is like really important. It's like this is the first stuff you see in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I could just walk through it. So yeah, they like you said, it's an alternative present, right? In 1984, it has a lot of like similarities, but certain important geopolitical shifts, right? And so, yeah, this idea the Soviet Union suffers its worst wheat harvest in 55 years, and then there's labor and food riots in Poland, so the Soviet troops invade, right?
Which is a real thing because in Poland at the time they were under martial law. Like I went through after I found this, and then I went through every single country they listed because I was curious, like, well, why they picked this one to figure out like what was going on. And there was a whole thing with a solidarity group. And they were under martial law. There was like, yeah.
Which was, people should know, was a CIA operation to like the solidarity labor movement within, Reagan, I think later touted that as like their most effective, like anti-communist thing in the 80s was like getting this labor union within Poland to turn against the Soviet Union and so on.
Right.
But these things are happening, right? Like it's also an era, I think, and the war in Afghanistan is going on, which I think is important to talk about as well, like in real life. And they do reference that in the film as well, although it's not part of the setup. But I think it's really important to politically what's going on in the era, right? Which is there's an importance to the film of showing the Soviet Union as an occupying force in the world, a force that goes into other countries who have different politics and ideologies and seeks to control them through like martial law and so on, right? Then in this is probably the most ridiculous idea, is that Cuba and Nicaragua reach a troop strength goals of 500,000. I don't know if that's supposed to be combined or individually, but then El Salvador and Honduras fall. So this is obviously connection also to all the dirty wars that are going on in the Reagan era, where they're supporting Contras and, you know, in some cases it's Contras, like in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, they're supporting a fascistic government against a communist movement, right? And so Milius is kind of posing, okay, what if we lose all of these things, right? Which is,
Right.
again, what Reagan relies upon so much for his interventionism in the period, is this idea that communism is right on our doorstep and we have to snuff it out, like
Right.
wherever it is.
So what I found interesting is, and you know, for folks who don't understand the geographical locations of these places, El Salvador, Honduras, and like they're all in the same corner, right? Like they're all linked geopolitically. One of the things that I discovered is that Radio Marti, which was the US line into Cuba's radio channels, started in '83. It was a Reagan project. Right? And so you have that happening. You have Nicaragua filing a case with the ICC against the US because of its military actions in their nation, right? You have also Nicaragua about to go into their first election, which of course is why the US is being so problematic, is because they're very concerned about who is going to end up in power in Nicaragua. You have, as you said, the civil war in El Salvador, which is obviously being backed by the US because they're trying to make sure that they prevent Cuba from having any real impact. And then you also have in Honduras this, I mean, I found it, I don't know if you saw that military doc that I linked, but I found an entire military doc that outlined what the US was doing in Honduras between 1982 and 1984. Like, it is wild, the interference that is happening. So the fact that they pulled those 4 countries in, given what was happening at the time, like, no one's, you know, this is see, and Tume knew this was coming. This is why he threw me head first down the rabbit hole. But like, when I started looking, I was like, these mofos, man, they really threw these things up here because they're very, very clear on what the US is involved in at this time.
Yeah.
And so they're highlighting those things.
And to add, Milius did films in El Salvador. So and the people who would back those films were the, you know, parts of that, the counter-revolutionary elements within that country who had Hollywood connections and government connections. Milius is on record in videos saying, I've spent a lot of time down there, right? And one of the things that Milius has always, he says, even to this day, is how much he believes in the Monroe Doctrine. And, you know, with the Monroe Doctrine, you know, well, it's always been a terrible thing, but the whole thing about, you know, the countries have their own sovereignty, so forth and so on, is what the Americans will say, right? And Europe can't do it and all this type of stuff, right? But how that was then applied when it came to communism was what Jay and Renee have been talking about, is this idea that communism is now denying the Monroe Doctrine of sovereignty, and it's going in there and it's poisoning countries. So Milius's whole thing is, and this really is important because it literally characterizes the whole film, is that what communism has done is it has gone to places that I don't think I know Milius would acknowledge have problems. Like, Milius is also one of these libertarian types who didn't necessarily think, and we'll talk about this, that the Cubans and Castro did have a right to revolt against Batista. His problem is that they became communist, and that he felt that the USSR broke with the Monroe Doctrine and, you know, didn't let them be their own sovereign nation and do things like that. Now, where Milius is, of course, I'm sure it's already in people's heads, is bankrupt in his political analysis, is he does not have the same smoke for the U.S. Though he will claim, I don't think we should be there either. But I'm like, but you're down there, John. So what are you talking about? So this kind of like colors the entire film and the ideology of the film. Yeah, let's go to this part. Renee, do you have any? I'm sure you have stuff on
Yeah.
this one.
So this was very interesting. So this is actually a direct reference to the fact that for the first time ever, an all-woman parliament from the Green Party of Germany had been elected into position in 83. And so I couldn't find what happened. Like I couldn't figure out like what happened after after they had their time. Like, did they just get ousted? Like, there's a lot of information now about women in politics in Germany that I think probably dates back to this era. But that parliamentary group won in 83. And I thought it was very interesting, this whole withdrawal of nuclear weapons, because I thought to myself, this is definitely them saying like only women would demand that countries like get rid of the nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so the Greens were only like 5%. So
Right.
they have a parliamentary system in Germany, right?
Yes.
And of course, this is West Germany at the time because there's still the Berlin Wall up at this point. But they're like 5% of the coalition, and they're similar. Like the politics are similar to the Green Party here. Like it was, environmental, left leaning, kind of social democratic, but also like
Right.
anti, big issues. There was a lot of people don't really, I think, fully grasp this unless you were in the era, but like the anti-nuclear movement was very big in this era and before, right? Of this idea of like getting everybody to disarm and so on. And so that's part of it. But this is more like the classic right-wing fever dream of like the Greens are going to come and take your guns, right?
Right.
Or the leftists are going
Right.
to come and take your guns, and then you'll be left to be destroyed by your enemies, right? And so that's really what you see. And so it's just like this fear mongering around these anti-nuclear kind of environmental hippie folks that are going to lead to the fall of Western civilization, basically.
Right.
Which is something that's still with us, of course. And then the other last couple of things on this entrance is just this is really critical, obviously, because a big part of the possibility of the invasion, which we kind of learn later on in the film, is because they can come up through Mexico, right? Because Mexico plunges into revolution. In the script, I believe they just say it directly as Mexico goes communist.
Right. But I'll add about Mexico, which again, this is the rabbit hole, y'all. So in Mexico, they had just elected Miguel de la Madrid, who was educated in the US and who started what turned into a very like friendly conversation with Reagan. And so there are all of these reports about, how de la Madrid and Reagan, would have these conversations, and it was all about, making sure that Mexico was, being a good business partner to the US, right? Which, of course, like he was trained and educated in the US, so that's going to happen. What's also interesting is this era in Mexico opened up what turned into a series of tragedies in Mexico City, including the fuel explosion, right? The earthquake. So it's almost like, they're mentioning Mexico because, this is where the weak line of defense is. And there's this huge fandom that came out of this movie that tells like how they would have used the Mexican borders to invade the US. Like this is like there's this whole like alternate universe fandom that exists from this movie based solely on Mexico being the point of entry for like it's wild in Tuve, wild. But it's interesting because that presidential change, that was a big change in Mexico, and there was a huge drop at the time in the Mexican economy. And there was all these struggles for the people in Mexico. And then this new president comes in. He's very friendly with the US. Of course, nothing gets better for the people. But it was an interesting rabbit hole learning so much about the Mexican president and what all happened and befell Mexico and Mexico City at the time.
Yeah, I'll just say folks should check out our conversations with Alex Avina, especially the one on Lucio Cabañas, because so the PRI, which is would translate roughly to Institutional Revolutionary Party, was basically like a one-party dictatorship in Mexico since the 1920s, but it had like revolutionary kind of sloganeering and messaging to a certain extent, but it became a very, I guess the best way to describe it is it always was kind of a collaborationist party with the US. And so Mexico was big in, kind of helping to, combat communism actually within the West, right? It became sort of a client state within throughout really the 20th century. I mean, the rise of people like AMLO and their current president, I'm forgetting her name, Claudia something, right? Steinberg, something like that.
Steinbaum, right?
Yeah.
I think
that's
right.
Yeah. Is actually like the rise of a little bit of an oppositional left to the history of the PRI. And I mean, it's kind of, I guess I'm just saying that to say it's quite an outlandish fantasy, to in this moment to think that, communist revolution was right on the heels in Mexico much earlier, because their revolution in, I want to say like the 1910s, right? Was like very socialistic and communistic and so on, but basically it got co-opted and sold out, unfortunately. And the US was heavily involved in that too.
Yeah, to this point, and it's interesting because this opening title card reminds me of a film by Sergio Leone called Duck You Sucker, which is about the Mexican Revolution and an Irish anarchist revolutionary played by James Coburn who goes and he aids them. It's literally the same design style. And I think Milius is playing with the same kind of concept here, because Leone, is revered once upon a time in, the West, and, Fistful of Dollars, all those movies, Good, Bad, and the Ugly. There's definitely a reference, and I know Milius comes from that kind of respect. And Milius will talk about, he has this weird affinity for revolutions. In a way, he's into it, and part of this is his fever dream of America becoming a revolutionary place again. But we'll talk about that. But yeah, we should go to the NATO thing really quick too. I think that's just an important thing.
Very quickly, I want to point out that this is also, and it occurred to me as it was happening, and I didn't put it in the notes, but as I'm looking at it, I'm reminded that the thought occurred to me because I had to look it up. The Star Wars beginning is also a plain black screen with yellow words floating across the screen, right? So there's also like, Milius went to USC with Lucas, like they were friends, right? And so there's also this very interesting attempt to like link people with this idea of like, you're trying to fight against the bad people. You know what I'm saying? Like it's wild. It's wild.
should we hit the? I mean, we show the NATO thing really quick, maybe.
Yeah, I can show that. Hang on, I'm doing too many things here.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Uh, so yeah, so NATO dissolves, right? Presumably related to the Greens taking on West Germany, right? They denuclearized, Europe, the Western Europe, and the NATO dissolves, and so the United States stands alone, is what they say is the entry point, and then the film starts at that point.
Yeah,
One other
go
thing
ahead.
on Milius I found fascinating, because you look at this picture, right? And like, I didn't think about any of this until I started watching some of the documentaries on him and stuff like that. But you're like, who does this guy look like? And the first thing that comes to mind, uh, for me, was Walter Sobchak from The Big Lebowski. And it turns out he was
That's
the
who. Yes, he
inspiration
was the inspiration
for
for that
he was the
character.
inspiration for Lebowski. Milius is also Jewish, which is not something that's like talked about a lot, but that's like Sobchak does all these weird references in the film to Theodore Herzl and all of these Zionist figures, um, and there's always a commentary from like Lebowski in the film of like, Walter, you're not even Jewish. And he's like, he goes on these rants about, how he married into it, and 6,000 years of tradition and all of this kind of stuff, but the piece about, I picked the picture deliberately of him pulling the piece out, because this is also something that is a part of Milius's lore, that he pulled the gun on studio executives at certain points. He was a member of the NRA and a big promoter of it.
Oh, not just
And
he was a board member of the NRA.
And worked directly with Charlton Heston on
On
various
a coup
big
and
coups.
cooed it. Yes.
Yeah. And so anyway, very much involved in that kind of stuff. And so the Coen brothers actually did use him as the inspiration. So and you watch him and his movements and the way he talks and the stuff he's interested in. And I guess another important piece about his story too is that he grew up desperately wanting to be a soldier, and he tried to go to Nam, and then he has asthma is what he says. And so he says he was medically not allowed. I don't have any reason to question that necessarily, but it's just an interesting thing, that because of course Apocalypse Now becomes like his first like huge, well, I don't know how big it was, box office wise, but I imagine
Oh,
it was
it
pretty
was a huge
big.
hit.
Yeah.
Apocalypse Now was
Yeah. Yeah.
it was billed as a film that was about to be a failure, and it became a surprise, hit.
Yeah.
And then also being connected to Dirty Harry is just so big for him. But yeah, Apocalypse Now pretty much gave him the ability to then do Conan, which was also a huge hit. And we'll have to do Conan at some point, because I think a lot of the stuff around Milius's love for rugged individualism, he has this real interest in primitivism that definitely is imbued in this film, and going back to the land and all this type of stuff, real, libertarian right-wing shit, that when you go back to the land, your warrior spirit will rise. I know it sounds crazy what I'm saying. You're like, but this is stuff that the guy literally has said, is things that he says in public to film students and film fans. This is the stuff that he says. So it's all within his films. This is all this guy's stuff starts. So as we start digging into this movie more further, like it's all imbued within it. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah. And he's very clear about, like, his dream was to be in the military and to go to war and then to become, a high level military person. Like, this was like his big plan for life. According to him, he flamed out when he was trying to get into the Marine Corps. But also, according to him, he couldn't even hack it through ROTC. So I don't really know, like, what the whole story is with that. but it was his dream to go to war, basically. And so what he says in multiple interviews, from what I found, was that because he couldn't actually go to war, the second best thing for him to do is make movies about it. So that's why so many of his movies have this weird, like, he's gross, yo. Like, for real, he's gross. He's gross. And everything about him is gross. So everything he's associated with is gross. That's why all his movies are gross. Like, he's gross.
Yeah, I mean, he's a hard person to like live in his head for a long time, right? It's really difficult. So thank you, Renee. We appreciate you. So let's go into the movie. So like the movie starts off, you know, after that you get these like clouds, it's like floating in the clouds, like big cloud shot of them going in. And then you get to like the All America town, right? And the film also is guided by months. So you'll see, like it says September. It doesn't give you a year. So it kind of wants to float a little bit, I think. You know, reference the now, but have a kind of like floating. Imagine it could be next year, it could be right now, it could be in 10 years or whatever like that. And, you know, you get good old middle white America. And I say white very, very pointedly. It is middle white America. And one of the very first things you see, like you see like a chevron thing. First, you see like, you know, the white houses. And then one of the very first things is you see Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is, do you have that one shot that I have?
Well, let's just start with this. This is
Yeah.
like the worst Teddy Roosevelt sculpture. I mean, it looks like the Dwayne Wade like sculpture that they made outside of the Miami Heat. You know, I mean, it's like, what the hell? Like a skinny, emaciated, giant mustached Teddy Roosevelt. But yeah, so I have that, and then I'll pull up the little placard of what it actually says about him. Here you go.
Yeah, you have the Rough Rider. You know, like this is one of the very first things invoked in the film. Far better it is to dare mighty things than to take rank with those poor, timid spirits who know neither victory nor defeat. Theodore Roosevelt, 1899. And Roosevelt will come back up in this film, right? And he's definitely cast as like a guiding spirit very early on. And, you know, if you know anything about Roosevelt and his contributions to American imperialism, the cat is out the bag very early, right? You get gas company and you get Teddy Roosevelt within, you know, a shot of each other, right? And we're immediately thrown into this part of America, right? And he doesn't really waste time. Like immediately you see someone like really your three main male stars as far as like the young. Number one is Patrick Swayze, who by this time was kind of getting his star rise at this moment. This is like the beginning kind of for Swayze. You have C. Thomas Howell, who I think many people probably don't remember now because his career by the like 90s was done. But C. Thomas Howell,
he might be the biggest star in the film. I mean, like
at the time,
at the time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he for the Outsiders was his big thing. Which Swayze was also in, but Swayze had a smaller role. But apparently, I think Swayze's role in The Outsiders was supposed to be bigger. It got cut down a lot because the movie got cut down severely. And you have Charlie Sheen in his very first film. He had some things that he did. And obviously, we also know that Charlie Sheen comes from a pedigree of Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen was in Apocalypse Now. I always think the fact that Charlie Sheen's two of his very first films are war movies has to do with the fact that he looks so much like his father, and his father being in Apocalypse Now and him being a symbol of Vietnam is definitely referenced here. It's in the minds of these people. We can use Charlie; it'll be referenced in their heads. Yeah, so you get them immediately, right? And then, you know, I don't know, anybody want to add anything to those points or take us into our first thing?
Well, just real quick, I just want to add that in 84, and I looked this up as you were talking because it was on my list of things to look up, and I actually forgot to look it up. Chevron was in the middle of a major legal controversy in 1984 when this movie came out, which means that it would have been ongoing as the movie was filming. And it's kind of the doctrine. The end result is actually the Chevron doctrine, which guided like how federal agencies were supposed to make determinations with regard to the EPA. So it's interesting that Chevron is the one that shows at the start of the movie, because Chevron itself, as problematic as they are still, right? Like that was the one that they picked. But when you consider what was happening again at the time, it was obviously intentional. And so I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out because the rabbit holes.
Yeah, just a couple other things. Leah Thompson and Jennifer Grey obviously are both in the film too. They don't come into it until later. We'll talk about that when they get there. But like, these become huge stars in the 80s. Leah had been in Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D, and a film called All the Right
Such
Moves.
a bad movie if no anybody's
Terrible.
seen it. Jaws 3D
Terrible.
is so bad.
I know, we may have to do that too. But both All the Right Moves and Jaws 3D are in 83. And so she's the third, like in the billing of the stars, it's Swayze, C. Thomas Howell, Leah Thompson. And Sheen, as you said to me, is like relatively unknown. This is like maybe his first really big role, even though he was in a couple of things in the 70s. But yeah, and it's also interesting, of course, as you mentioned, the Apocalypse Now connection to Milius, because he obviously would know the family from doing that movie with him and stuff like that. But the other thing I'll say just on Milius too is part of what he gets known for, right or wrong, is the dialogue, right? Is his ability to make quote unquote real dialogue, which it's more like kind of these, like he kind of has a way of infusing sort of slogan type stuff, or like these kind of tough guy lines, I guess you could say, right? Like the Dirty Harry stuff, all of that. And it feels, for whatever reason, like that's kind of what he's known for, and we'll see some of that kind of stuff in this film too. But yeah,
I'm gonna say, yeah, as a film professor, someone who's taught screenwriting, been in the film world for very long, Milius is always referenced in this kind of way, and that's why I initially had to like look him up. I think it's overrated. Not saying that I don't think like some of the stuff in Jaws is like that he wrote is cool, but I think what Milius embodies is this Americana style of edgy and quippy writing that's supposed to feel like immediate and direct, but have, I think, a concept of humanity, but it's a humanity that's wrapped up into, I think, the rugged individualism that became so popular in movies. And I find often the liberal embrace of this end of Milius a kind of secret admission that a lot of the liberalism in Hollywood is really also pretty right wing. But we'll talk about that as we keep going. Yeah, so then we have the invasion.
Where the only black person in the movie gets killed in the first, and because it happened that way, because he dies immediately, I spent the entirety of the rest of the movie looking for black people, because I was like, did they really kill off the only black person in this entire movie in the first 3 minutes? And they surely did. They
did. And yeah, let's see, I did the same thing, Renee. I mean, technically Ron O'Neal, right? But Ron O'Neal is supposed to be a Cuban, who I think is a Che Guevara like composition. Actually, as I was like, I mean, obviously Che had been killed at this time, and so on. But yeah, we'll get to that later anyway. But yes, they kill him off early on.
they're like at school. The kids are at school. This black man is teaching a lesson on Genghis Khan, which is another fascination of Milius. Milius had a stroke, I think, like a decade ago, and while he was before he had the stroke, he was actually in the middle of developing a Genghis Khan film. It was supposed to be like his, magnum opus, his like final thing. So he's had this long obsession with Genghis Khan, going back to this whole primitivism. And if you look at that picture, while that's supposed to be Genghis Khan, it looks a little bit like John Milius, because it is John Milius.
Right. Well, he says that his whole love, his idea to become, involved in movies happened because, and I'm blanking on the name of the movie he went to see after he didn't get into the military. He was sitting in some theater, and it was a series of movies about samurais and this whole thing, and he claims like that's the thing that led him to decide he was going to be
like
in
Seven
movies.
Samurai, things like that, like the
Kurosawa
films,
yeah,
which is interesting because that's Lucas. Lucas has that same fascination. I mean, if you think about Star Wars, the Hidden Fortress, and that kind of samurai series made by Kurosawa is also a big inspiration, if not a driving inspiration, for Star Wars. That and the Joseph Campbell BS stuff. But yeah, this is what we get here. We get the kids are just getting the lesson about Genghis Khan, and then we just have parachuting in, and they all think at the beginning that it's like a military, an American military training, right? They're all like a little bit confused at it, and then the black man walks out because he's a good teacher. What y'all doing? Why y'all out here messing with my classroom? He's like, what's his name? Who got mad at the protesters? What's his name? The right wing dude that Jared Ball loves. I forget his name. He got mad at them, at the protesters at Columbia. I just forget his name. Anyway.
Shy.
No, a black man. Glenn Lowry's partner, homie, that they be always doing their show together. Anyway, he got mad. He said he got mad at the pro-Palestine protesters. He had to walk out of class and say, we're listening to Mozart. How dare you protest while we're playing Mozart? McWhorter, yep, John McWhorter. Yeah. He's the John McWhorter.
This scene, I mean, it has to be said, like, how insane this scene is. Like, it is so bananas. Like, he's sitting in there teaching a little bit of, like, Genghis Khan history, and they're just all these parachutes coming down. There's airdrops of, like, weapons, and they go to, and like, he walks right out, I mean, it's just, like, I don't even know how to deal with this scene because, like, you see guys with
terrible.
Machine guns.
That's how you deal with it. Yeah, it's terrible. The whole setup is terrible.
You see guys with machine guns paratrooping in, and they're not in U.S. Army military gear, right? So it's not like you think this is like, they seem to think it's a training exercise that has like somehow fallen in the wrong place. Like, the professor or the teacher says something along the lines of like, oh, they're way far away from where they should be, kind of thing. It's like they're in the backyard of your history class at the high school, and they're pulling out machine guns on tripods, and you just walk right up to them like, my man, what are you doing? And of course they shoot him right away, which then gets into the even more absurdity. Like, if a country was invading the United States, the first thing that they would do is parachute into the backyard of a high school in Colorado and shoot up the school. Like, they don't just go at the teacher, they start shooting kids. Like, it's totally nuts, right? And so anyway, I mean, that whole scene is ridiculous.
The whole scene is ridiculous. And I mean, the black man dies first. There is a white kid who dies second. So I guess there's that. Because you have to do the whole they hit one of them thing. But the idea, the first thing I thought to myself is like, so you look out your window and you just see these things come in and nobody's like running, right? Like, they're all just watching out the window to see what happens next. But as you said, the whole premise of like all of these troops are falling in this one small like Midwestern town, and we're supposed to believe like this is what's going to happen. Like it's such a bizarre premise. And you had mentioned before that there was no year in Tume, and I found that interesting because to me it was like you should be afraid because this could happen at any time. This could be today, it could be next month, it could be next year. We're not going to put a year because it could happen tomorrow, right? Like,
yeah, like one of the things about the movie, I think it's trying to play on this, you know, concept of like America as being a place that cannot be penetrated, you know, and that historically, we think about the historical context of every major war that's happened with a power, a foreign power. World War I, World War II has happened on their soil. Yes, Japan did come into Pearl Harbor, but I think Pearl Harbor is really important because there's a way that imperialism has used the Pearl Harbor invasion to kind of sit in people's thoughts as we must stay impenetrable. If we're able to be penetrated by a foreign power, then we are literally like everyone else. But Milius is weird because I think Milius desires this. He actually thinks this is the thing that would actually make America kind of reach its like higher potential in the historical epic of like the world, right? Which is like why he's so twisted. But this is a very libertarian popularity right-wing thing. They're into this kind of idea. And so yeah, like, and I think he wants it to be unbelievable. Like, oh, they just came out of nowhere and no one was ready. But it's just set up terribly. Like, it's just bad filmmaking because to set up unbelievability, you have to, and you have to set up also like what the world is in a believable way, right? You have to kind of give us, you know, the possibilities where this makes sense, or obscure it, or make the behavior of the characters make somewhat kind of sense. And it doesn't. Like, I remember I was watching it and I was like, are you serious? Like, this is not working. Like, dude, are you? Because like literally from that, it goes into all that war. I mean, I'm talking like it's not just guns. They got, you know, rocket launchers, grenades, there's like tanks everywhere. I'm like, wait a minute, where did the tanks come from? It just doesn't work in my head. Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm like totally, I cannot suspend my disbelief to this type of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. So like, should we just move into like how this kind of develops?
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to add, Renee, before we move in?
I think Renee.
Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it starts in September. So like there's it's crazy, it's chaos, right? There's it's funny to watch, not funny, but it's interesting to watch today because school shootings were not a thing on people's minds in the 1980s. Really like Columbine and the Eugene Springfield one kind of kick it off in the mid 90s. And so but it's Soviets coming in and shooting up a school, but nobody really knows initially like who these people are. Like, it's not, the students are just like running in terror. Charlie Sheen's character, who's a football player, which is an important part of the plot, is that Matty is his name, or Matt, and his brother Jed, who's named after Jedediah Smith, which we should probably talk about at some point. But they're football players. Jed, who's played by Swayze, I already graduated, it seems, at this point, but is still driving them to school in the pickup truck, which is like another character in the film a little bit. And yeah, so Sheen like tackles to show his football, he like tackles some Russian, like, military guy, but it's chaotic. Students are getting shot, teachers are being shot, and they're running out into the parking lot, and they jump. For some reason, I don't know how he knew, Jed circled back in his pickup truck and picks up a bunch of the kids. Really, it's all boys at this point that he picks up. which is like, there's a student body president, there's football players, there's Arturo Aardvark, who is the one sort of, I guess, person of color that is supposed to be in it, and it's weird that he has the name Aardvark, and it's weird that like things happen to him that are significant within the plot of the film, but he's never treated as a real character. Like it's never his emotions or grief or any of that is just not even shown. Nor really do they care when he dies, which is also like an interesting thing. But he's with them, and they're going through town. You see actually Arturo's father captured by troops in town, like, yelling, waving for his son, and they're driving away from the dad, and the dad gets captured. And yeah, they get away, they get to a general store, which is, I think, Morris's store, right? Which one of the child played, or C. Thomas Howell, his father, it's his store. So Robert Morris is his name, which again, the naming is significant. So Robert Morris is a financier of the American Revolution. Jedediah Smith is a settler and fur trader and explorer kind of figure. And so they get to there, and they're just like, hey, there's people invading. It sounded like they're speaking somebody said, I think they're speaking Spanish. That's actually a kind of funny part. And because Mr. Morris, who runs the store, is like, Spanish, and then he gives them all the guns. Like it's a general store that's like a kind of bait and tackle / gun shop / so has all these soup cans, and so they give them guns, a ton of ammunition, soup, and like canned beans and food and stuff like that, and a whole crap load of Coca-Cola. And they put all of that in the back of the truck, and then they start to drive into the wilderness. They run into a big roadblock that's set up with like tanks and personnel carriers and machine guns and so on. And Swayze, who's driving the pickup, like goes off road. They start to launch like missiles and RPGs and machine gun fire at the pickup truck, but they kind of get behind a hill, and then it's a helicopter that comes in, a U.S. helicopter.
A U.S. helicopter comes in, and the way they kind of do it is you can't sometimes tell what is what. So you're wondering, is the helicopter also going to be? Is it another like supporting of the invaders? And then you find out, because then they attack the invaders. So like he's constantly trying to, subvert your expectations, but he's doing a really terrible job of it, because the film really, I guess it just hinges on if you have this xenophobic fear of invasion already baked within you. If you have this kind of thought that the Cubans are around the corner, and if they get mad enough and enough skill, they can come in and take over, which is hilarious because Cuba is not even the size of Florida, right? Like that, if it's baked within you, you can do it. But for anyone who's rational like us, when we see this, we're just like, this just doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand, right? This is like not clicking. And that's what it does. So yeah, the helicopter helps the kids out, and they're able to kind of go off into the field. And then like I think you're quickly kind of brought back to like the nighttime, where of like the town, and the occupying forces have like totally taken over, and they're still like pushed back from the U.S. military, but they're totally kicking their ass, the occupying force.
Right. It's
Yeah.
a total. It's a total takeover, which is, which, I mean, according to the movie, happens in one day, right? Like it doesn't, like there's no, it takes nothing, which also, to me, is a signal for get your guns. Don't forget, like make sure you're ready, because when they come, we're gonna need everybody to be ready, right? It's wild.
Isn't the cold dead hands thing here also like?
Yeah.
Where is that? I forget exactly where.
The bumper sticker.
It's in a bumper sticker. Yeah, say it. Yes, I kind of forget, but go ahead, Jay.
So it's just during that scene where they're leaving town, and they just flash to like a Soviet, like, so there's a bumper sticker that says "You'll get my gun when you pry it from my cold dead hands," and a Soviet steps on a dead guy's gun or hand and takes his gun out of his hand, and that like it's like so yeah, it's
I
ridiculous.
can't
Like
lie.
one
I
of those
laughed. I was like, "Oops, well,
yeah.
cold dead hands. The gun got pried out." You.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm Brooks raising this up, but I think it's really important. We were pounded daily with this level of nonsense in the 80s. And I think that's right. Like, I don't like one, this is an important film in the overall, like, just anti-communist barrage that was the 80s. Also, it is like in the script, one of the things, the script is different because Milius didn't write the script. He did change it to, but Reagan is the president in the script, right? So it is like initially as it's written, it is designed to be like in the Reagan era and to be referencing all of those interventions that Reagan is involved in, Monroe Doctrine style interventions, and the importance of them in fighting this war against communism, right? And so it's like if we're not strong in all of these wars and win them, then this is what's going to happen. And that was, I mean, Reagan was very prominent in pushing that kind of messaging, and so, anyway, that's
And
it's just important, I think, contextually.
and just real quick, so people understand, like the movie came out August 10th of '84, which was an election year. And it was also right. It was the election year of getting Reagan and Bush reelected into the White House that year. So for me, this was also in part like, August, like that is you are kicking in with your real electoral like this is the window, right? Like, is it going to be the who's tougher on crime, who's going to make sure that we win the wars? So a lot of this to me, when I started really looking at the timeline, I was like, man, they be so in cahoots with the military and whoever's in the White House to make sure that they present these things in just a way so that it's like it's fresh in the American mind, right? The quote unquote American mind as they're going to the polls, right? Like it's wildly propaganda. Like it's wild. The propaganda is wild.
Yeah. And we should say, I mean, so the Democratic candidate that year was Walter Mondale, who had been the vice president under
Yep.
Jimmy Carter, who was widely seen as like too weak in the world and too much, not imperialist enough and so on. And, Reagan was like the strong. So it's like, and this was something that the Democrats really didn't get out of until Clinton with his neoliberal, chummy nonsense. But like that, this idea of the Democrats as just weak and not, not strong enough. Like it was something that the Republicans really leaned into with, Nixon, Reagan, Bush coming out of the CIA. Like it just was a period of these, like the ascendancy of the neocons, and them representing kind of a strong America with the Democrats representing a weak, not willing to defend, which of course is still like between the the duopoly, that's still kind of how things are characterized quite often.
So another thing to kind of remember is about that scene is like when you watch these young guys, especially like Sheen and not Swayze, but the other guys, like they have on like their football jackets. And like Jay mentioned like the football thing. And I'm sure Renee's gonna have some really good football comments in this. I know about football in your life, but then like how football is invoked in this movie, right?
Oh, it's brutal.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. And what I kept thinking about is there's so much connections, right? Because then you start thinking about like Wolverines as like a mascot, right? And who else are Wolverines? And like it's just
Yeah, 100%. And so they have these coats on, and you're juxtaposing it with these army things. So they're kind of setting up immediately like who this force is going to be because they're so valiant. And then Swayze is interesting because he's older than them, and he kind of dictates everything. how they move, which is interesting for two reasons. One is a behind the scene, and then one is like really how the movie functions. A behind the scene thing was I found out that Milius would not give the other actors screen directions directly. He would make Swayze do it because he said he wanted a military command style in how he made the film work. So he wanted basically Swayze to be a kind of military like leader, right? Of it. I'm sorry, this picture of Jennifer Grey with a gun on the side. We have a couple pictures of Jennifer Grey with guns. It's just like so it's just so
weird.
See Thomas Howell with the RPG too in the background.
It's just so ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous.
It's all through the movie too. Like it just goes even nuts. But that's how he formed it, and it becomes really significant. And when you see how Swayze leads, so like kind of keep pushing. Like so, then the next thing you see is like the occupied town, and it's like fell under darkness, and you see the tanks, and so immediately you meet one of you get your first connection to an antagonist, like a leader of the force, and it is Ernesto Bella, played by Ron O'Neal. If people don't know who Ron O'Neal is most famous for Superfly. He was Superfly in the 70s blaxploitation films. He was also Whitley Gilbert's father on A Different World a little bit later after this. He was also lesser known, did a lot of like radical black plays in the 60s. That Charles Godin's No Place to Be Somebody before he became Superfly. And he's in this movie as a Cuban general, though I don't know if he's Cuban immediately. He's Latin American because he speaks Spanish. And I found it interesting because Ron O'Neal, a black man, right, is leading these troops. So you're getting this like Afro-Latino in there leading mostly white soldiers is what you see. And he has like another guy who you believe it to be is Russian. He has the typical, Russian hat, and he's giving them orders. So I had this immediate reaction. First, I had to get past the Ron O'Neal thing, which I still don't think I've actually gotten past, because what that just kind of just says to me about Ron O'Neal's politics and what he's willing to do. But this idea that this man is going to lead this army, I found fascinating that Milius would make this move. And I think it has something to do also with kind of stories that come out of the Soviet Union. I agree with you, Jay, about the Che thing, but I do think there's a Castro thing also, because one of the stories that people like to play with, and I don't know how much truth is, I don't really care. I do know, like they said, Castro was very popular in the Soviet Union. I guess there was like people have said stories that like, there was a time he was more popular than Stalin, or like I don't know. I don't really follow those kind of things. I find that they use it to kind of make everything look a bit crazy and like it's like a soap opera. But I know Milius likes those kinds of things, so it almost feels like the story of like Castro being even more dynamic. Right, and he can lead this in ways that the Slavics couldn't. He could actually really handle this. It shows the kind of libertarian, like quasi love for revolutionaries, though they don't love what they embrace. They like the fighting spirit, and you see that with Ernesto Bella a lot in the movie played by Ron O'Neal. You're gonna say something, Jay? I think.
Just a couple things. I mean, yeah. So there's a couple of reasons I thought of Che. Obviously, like you say, he's an Afro-Latino, so it's not a 1-to-1, but he later in the film, and we'll get to this, I'm sure, but he talks about, like, I've seen this before: Nicaragua, El Salvador, Cambodia, Angola, and Mexico, but these are my men, right? So he's referencing that. And this is something important in the film. It's a film very much about some of the politics of insurgency and counterinsurgency also. And he's saying, look, I participated in all of these revolutions on the side of the revolutionaries, and here I am as a policeman, is what he eventually says, like the Soviets. And so there is, again, this gets to, we'll get into that more. So that's like part of it, is like the sort of Cuban internationalism in support of anti-colonial revolution. It's also that his name is Ernesto, right? Which is, of course, Che Guevara's real first name. And so I did think that those were a couple of things where I was like, yeah, like that's kind of the spirit that he's trying to embody with this figure. Anyway, the other thing, just quickly, we did move past a couple of scenes that I do think are somewhat important, not deeply, but the survivalism aspect of these guys is very important. And there are multiple scenes, like the first scene around the campfire. At first, the kid who's the student body president tries to coup the whole group and say, we're going back to town. And Jed Swayze's character basically is like, look, I'll kick your butt. And then he's like, fine, get out of here, take your shit, throws his bag at him and all of that. And it's clear that they don't want to leave all by themselves. Like, and so, Swayze's like, if y'all stay, you have to listen to my command, basically. So it sets up this command structure of like the top jock football star leading the troops. And the other thing is that Jed and Matt, who are the brothers, their father is tough, which we will learn more about later, but has trained them to be hunters and fishermen and to survive. And so they also are like, look, we can survive out here, which is part of the student body president's like, I don't want to sleep in the woods. Like, I'm scared, man, kind of thing. And so then there's quickly also that scene with them and C. Thomas Howell hunting. C. Thomas Howell character, Robert, kills a deer, and they make him drink the blood of the deer, which is so funny. I found the most hilarious Reddit page about people like, should I do this after I kill a deer? And like all these replies of like, no, are you freaking nuts? Like, you will get all these diseases and everything. Like, don't ever do this, folks. But he just like sticks like a cup in the deer and then just drinks it. And then they do this, and this is the reason I bring this up is that there is this is also a Milius theme, but this like settler becoming native, like playing these kind of false indigenous rituals, right? And like making them your own. And it says something about like the deer will always be a part of you forever now. And there's like this, so it's this weird, like kind of pseudo spiritual thing that, that these white survivalist kids are passing on to each other. And there's very interesting, I would be really interested. I don't know if I thought he did, but I couldn't find it. If Nick Estes has ever done, or like the Red Nation has ever done stuff on this movie, because like there is some really interesting politics around like self-indigenization and settlers, like, playing this, like we're really the people of this land, which we'll get to more as we go through this. But this is kind of like one of the original scenes in this.
And I just want to, so this is also it's not the first football reference, but it's the first time that you link Swayze as the quarterback, right? The head guy, because as they're driving up, they've got the stadium in the background with the board, with whatever the score, whatever game score was up on the board, and they're cutting jokes about him losing and them winning. So there's like there's that small reference, but it, this whole connection of like, he's the quarterback, so he has to lead this whole thing because he was the quarterback, right? And I just want to point out real quickly, because I had to look it up, because Patrick Swayze was 34 when they filmed this movie, which is wild to me that like he's playing this teenager. But then I always have to remember that, like, Beverly Hills 90210, what's his name, was like in his 30s and playing, like they were all like in their 30s and playing teenagers. So this is a thing that happened often. But I had to look it up because I was like, how old is he, like playing a kid who just graduated out of high school when this movie is happening? But that scene, first of all, him drinking the deer's blood was gross, but also like the whole thing, like the cup is steaming, like it's just so like it's so ridiculous. The whole thing is so ridiculous, and I just keep like just in my head as I was watching, thinking like who came up with this idea and thought this shit was a good idea? This movie's terrible.
But this is like it's a thing that this libertarianism is so attached to. Like you I mean, not to kind of go through like even some of my own like experience in like art schools when I meet people who are into these kinds of movies, there is an ideology that this is like how people get real, how they become real, and it's so pervasive. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I just say from my own experience, I grew up in Southern Oregon, like, and so my father hunted, my mother hunted, like, we a significant portion of our meat growing up was venison, like frequently, all year round. Like they would freeze it, get it all different kinds of forms and so on. And my father still fishes to this day. He doesn't hunt anymore, but like, um, and my father was a leftist, right? But like this, so there's a movement of kind of a back to the land thing that also happens after the 60s. That included a whole bunch of people, whether they were libertarians or like hippies or whatever. And I mean, they're definitely more to the like right wing libertarian thing. Like that's pretty clear in the way the film is sort of setting this all up. But you know, I I grew up in the 80s around this kind of stuff, and so the idea of like I never saw anybody drink blood of a of a deer that they killed, but the idea of these like bonding and intergenerational kind of rituals around deer hunting and this connection to, manhood and providing and putting food on the table and all of this, like it's deep in the West. And so in the western part of the country and in Colorado and places like that. Like, so that part of it didn't seem strange to me at all, and that culture is still there, and it is predominantly a right-wing culture, but not entirely. And so, yeah, anyway.
So to keep moving, one thing to also point out, Renee pointed out about the Star Wars texts. C. Thomas Howell in the film, and we showed it, I think it's even in that video, he has a Star Wars hat. Yep. Right? And it's featured prominent early before his big turn. He probably as a character has like the most like turn in it. If you think about it, he's like used as a kind of like example of like what this ruggedness would do to someone, but that's a whole other conversation. We'll get into later. But yeah, the Star Wars thing. And if we remember like Star Wars, right, the idea of the rebels, right? And who were the good people that we're supposed to embody. And by this point, the trilogy had been done, right? It's like, yeah. We had all three trilogy, I think, films were done. I think the last one was 83. So people have already gotten the kind of full, experience of the rebels defeating the Empire. So you have Star Wars being invoked in his hat. We know who we're supposed to root for, which becomes important because as this group of Wolverines develop and they go into guerrilla warfare, something that America often has made to be a negative, but Milius wants to kind of co-opt it or embrace it into his kind of whole vision of how warfare needs to happen when or if we get this kind of invasion. He wants to kind of use it for his own right-wing politics. And it gets very interesting. So, yeah, they're like up there. They're doing all this stuff. And one of the things that they immediately show is that they're like disconnected from everything. The radio doesn't work, so they don't know what's happening. So this was like, to me, the next really comedic part is that they end up going back to town to see how the occupied parts were. And I have to say, through this sequence, I couldn't stop laughing at like how they would envision an occupied town by like, and I just don't want to say Soviet, by communism. And it's one of the weird things about the film. It's the US versus communism, not even capitalism versus communism. which I think is really important. It's the US versus communism as this big, large tent, right? But they get back to the town and they see it completely taken over. I mean, there's Lenin posters everywhere. I think we have a picture of them walking in the town, or some Lenin posters behind them and other stuff. I don't know, Renee, do you have any thoughts
Well,
around
it's so
coming
funny
back home?
because I read your note and I was like, that didn't, in the moment, I remember thinking, so they're just like walking around like nobody, but I didn't write it down as like a note because I think by that time I had decided the movie was so ridiculous that like nothing surprised me at that point. But they're in occupied territory and just like wandering, right? And people are telling them like they're looking for you, right? Like there's this big like, they're looking for these kids who disappeared into the mountains because why, like how they know they exist or whatever have you. But they were able in this quote unquote occupied territory to just like walk up in their football jackets and like wander around and talk to people. And there's even in the store when they go in and talk to the woman in the store, there's someone in there with a gun, right? So there's
It's
also
the KGB, Renee. It's the
right.
KGB.
But there's also this sense of almost like how stupid the invaders are, right? Which I think is something that really, like, it's a big underlying thing in my opinion, is that they're so stupid, like they're occupying, but they can't catch these few kids who are like wandering around, right? Like he's there with a gun and he doesn't see these 3 kids who they're supposedly looking for like walk into the store, and he doesn't recognize it's them. Like the whole thing almost infantilizes the troops that go in to invade because they're so stupid, right? Like they just can't get anything right, and they're the invaders. It's such a bizarre, it's bizarre, man. It's a bizarre contradiction because at the same time they've dropped into this territory and taken over, but they're so bad at what they're doing that they can't control these 5 like idiot kids who are running around in the mountains. Like it's such a wild thing. And I just remembered that story from Things You Didn't Know About the Movie, the guy in the parachute who got caught in the tree because he got blown like a mile away while they were filming, and people were actually worried that something was happening. And there was like a whole thing because this poor guy is like trapped in a tree that got blown off course. It's just, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So I'll just read a couple other things. I took a bunch of notes on this part. So yeah, that's the People's Bank. Like, so we saw the Lenin posters. There's a sign up that says the People's Bank. There's a sign that says, in America, the poor still go hungry. There's a big banner that reads, the new man arises from the ashes of capitalism. I'm like, how based is all this shit? And then, of course, as they're doing it, they're chucking books into a fire, right? So it's just like taking all of the books and just burning books, right? So that's, of
and
course,
it gives off Nazism, which I think is very important. It
Yeah.
gives off Nazism in their occupations, which I find crazy if you think about how Nazism occupied the Soviet Union, parts of it, and what they did.
Yeah, and Pinochet, of course, too, was burned a bunch of books. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just in that interaction with the store clerk, Jed Swayze says, the Russians, after she says the KGB is looking for you, and she says, and the Cubans, and Swayze goes, the Cubans, and they all look at each other like, oh my God. Like, so it's like such a funny little moment because you're like, so wait, in their minds, it is worse somehow to be invaded by the Cubans than, because these are, I mean, presumably because they're people of color, the Latinos, etc. Like at least the Russians look like us or something. Like, I don't even know what the logic we're supposed to get from that is, but it was fascinating to me that it was clear to them that they were more concerned about the Cubans than they were about the Soviet Union at the time, which is just yeah, I don't know. I mean, probably also because they're 90 miles off the shore of the United States. I don't know, and all the propaganda against them. But anyway, it
Yeah.
is interesting.
The other thing in the town is when they walk by, there's a movie theater, and it's playing Alexander Nevsky, which is a great film by Sergei Eisenstein, which is, I know, a film that Milius would have been made to watch in film school. Because another thing to remember is he went to USC. A lot of those guys at the time were watching left-wing films, very influenced by them. I mean, Scorsese even admits it. He was very influenced by a lot of the third cinema stuff. So I'm sure he was very aware of that stuff, Milius, and he was forced to watch Eisenstein films. So I can't help also take it as a dig, because it's later known that showing Alexander Nevsky is part of the Soviet re-education camps. So I'm thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, Milius, I'm sure you're making a comment on the left wing nature of your cinematic education, being forced to watch Eisenstein.
And just quickly, should be obvious to folks, but like a big thing that they're doing, right, is to try to say that all of these slogans that come with socialism are false, right? That like them saying that the poor are hungry in America, we'll get to the starving Americans later on, like them saying that, you know, that you're going to be liberated from capitalism and that this is going to lead to a new humanity, da da da. This is all BS. They want to occupy you, oppress you, like not let you go. There are curfew signs everywhere. You can't go outside after like 8 o'clock. Like, so it's just naked repression. And that's what the reality is. Their propaganda is all totally BS, right? So that's a big part of what's happening too, is trying to juxtapose what they're saying is the propaganda of communism with the realities, right? And this is through this, you know, kind of libertarian lens. But yeah.
Where should we push to now? So there's
So
that. Keep going.
the re-education camp we have to talk about. So yeah, I'll just say a couple of things. I'll let you guys go. But there's over the speakers is blaring, America is a whorehouse where the revolutionary ideals of your forefathers are corrupted and sold in alleys by the vendors of capitalism. Again, a bar. They walk right up to the fences. This is another thing. Like, to Renee's point, is like, how are they not like interrogated even during any, it's not even that they're not captured, right? Nobody stops them. No occupying army stops them as they're just walking freely through the town, around soldiers, and right up to the re-education camp against the fences of it, which has been set up in the old drive-in. So Americans are going to take your drive-in movies and stick your fathers in a re-education camp there. And they're playing, it's hard to like, I try to watch this scene multiple times to kind of, it's hard because there's a lot of different noise and different sounds. There's like terror screams of people being tortured and so on. They go to Tom Eckert, who is the father of Jed and Matt. And then they're looking for Samuel Morris, who's Robert Morris's father. Samuel Morris is not there. It's nobody knows what's happened to him. So this is part of where Robert, who is C. Thomas Howell's character, like starts to like, you know, you can see him like, oh no, what's happened to my dad? And Tom comes out and he talks about, I was tough on you both. Yet they pull him out. He has to be carried out because he's being tortured so much that he can't walk, basically. Blood coming out of his ears, his nose, bruising on his eyes, clearly being tortured. And he says, I know I was tough on both of you. I did things that made you hate me sometimes, but now you understand, don't you? And I was like, this is just a subtle allusion to like, or not so subtle, that clearly he like beat them as kids and stuff like that. I mean, that's what's running through my mind, at least. But then he reminisces about putting him on swings. And do you remember that? And basically he's like, you're on your own. Like, he goes through this rant of like, don't either of you ever cry again for me. Don't ever do it as long as you live, which is something that Swayze then repeats later to other members of the Wolverines. And then he tells them, you gotta get out of here. And then he just screams, avenge me, boys, right? As they're leaving. And so it's yeah, again, also just obviously a real, like, the darkest images you can imagine of what a re-education camp might be, right? So this is what Soviet re-education is about too. There's like this revolutionary sloganing and this, socialist communist propaganda going on, but really what they're doing is just torturing your fathers in camps. But anyway, go ahead.
Go ahead, Renee.
I see you giggling, and this is the whole avenge me thing. I was like, what is happening right now? like, so these three children are standing outside of this space that is totally guarded, right? They're talking through the fence. There's other people. It's not just them. Like, there are all these people standing on the other side of the fence talking to the people who are like in this encampment, right? But the whole avenge me thing, I'm like, nobody heard the man screaming, avenge me, and thought to themselves, like, well, who is he talking to? Like, what? But it also sets up, because at the end, when they die in that park where he talked about, remember, I used to take you to the park, right? Like, it's just such a bizarre, I was like, what is happening right now? Like, y'all are standing against this gate, they're crying, don't cry, this whole like men don't cry thing. It was too much. But so, I watched the bootleg version of this. So there was no subtitles. So this was when I realized, like, I got to go find the script, because I don't know what's happening, when people actually, when they had that first lies. I had found the script before, but I had to go through to see, like, does it tell you in the script what they're saying in the background on the speaker as this is happening? Because I assume there's subtitles, right? But it's so in that space on the script, after it's exactly what you read, Jared, it says propaganda continues.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you watch it with like subtitles for the movie, it just does like it's like muffled sound, like it's like you can't hear it. So there is a part of it there is something else being played that is hard to hear because of the screams and everything else going on. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Milius and company's whole thing is to show, which makes no sense to me. Yes, they're intelligent enough to basically invade a nation the size of the United States of America, but they're not intelligent enough to do an occupation, which is just like has an absurdity. And I don't know if we mentioned it. The father is played by Harry Dean Stanton. And look, another thing with this movie is me not forgiving certain actors for doing certain things, especially if they didn't like afterwards say, yeah, I did this ridiculous ass bullshit right-wing movie. Like, I mean, we'll get to Leah Thompson. She says it was the funnest movie she ever made, which, like, I'm like, all right, Leah, I know where your allegiances are. So, yeah, we have them, they have this big old crying moment. And with the re-education camp, they go back and they, kind of go back to their camp and start to kind of, unify themselves. Oh, no, before the camp. I'm sorry. They go and they visit, would it be a friend? It's like a town friend. Who is he again?
So it's Mason's ranch.
Mason's ranch, right?
Mr. Mason. Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't say like what his
Who
relationship is to the boys at all, other than he gives them the heirlooms.
Yeah, he gives them heirlooms. He gives them he tells them you can come here for food. You can come here and rest, right? You're going to say something, Jay?
Well, the heirlooms are his granddaughters. That's the heirlooms
right,
that
exactly. Right. And when he gets it to the bottom, because remember, at this time, we're still like an all male grouping. You open up the bottom of like and it's giving off Holocaust vibes, right?
Very much.
Like, opening up the bottom of the floorboard, and who is there? You have Jennifer Grey and Leah Thompson, two young women, like their faces are dirty, and he's like, please take them with you so they can escape, and now you have two young women as part of their grouping. And, they now go back into the mountains with like two new very significant members of their group who will be very significant throughout the rest of the film. I mean, though Jennifer Grey has very little lines, she does a lot of action. Homegirl is, ripping and roaring with those machine guns.
Listen, she doing a whole lot
Yeah.
that I had to ask myself, like, is anyone watching this thinking like there is no way that she could physically do the things that they're like presenting her as doing? Like, it's terrible.
Even
Terrible.
without training. I mean, that's one of the things about the film that kind of like annoys me, is like the lack of like idea of training. I mean, behind the scenes, they had to train for 8 weeks to do this movie. You know what I'm saying? To do a movie. So this is supposed to be real life. Where's their training to go out there and become these incredible guerrillas? You were going to say something, Jay.
No, I mean, the only other thing about that scene is that he says sons of bitches tried having their way with them, right? So there's like this implication, which will come up later, that they've been sexually assaulted by the Soviets, by whoever, by the ruling coalition, let's say the invading coalition. And it took them 2 days to sneak over to the ranch, right? Which again, like, is there's so many things about the plot that make no sense, but like, how are they able to just walk right into town, walk right to that re-education camp, and somehow they had to like sneak on their hands and knees all the way out to the ranch, these two women? Like, there's so many things like that that just make no sense. But yeah, and then they do get some more ammunition, and they get horses. And we did forget one thing, which is like part of the reason that they went back in town was because they ran out. So some amount of time has passed because they run out of soup, and that's really the kind of the plot device that leads them to go back into town, even though they still have deer meat and whatever else. But
so now I think it's actually a big turning point in the movie, in the film, because what then happens is they go back to the mountains. The kind of group that we're going to follow is pretty set.
They get a radio too. That's another.
They get a radio.
Point.
Yeah, they get a radio. Finally, he gives them a radio that he's been hiding. Also, like, there's like the implication. I mean, it's so Nazi occupation, and it's horseshoe theory, right? That a communist invasion will look just like a Nazi invasion. So, and even Milius even admits that he got a lot of this from what he believes happened in World War II, right? From his vantage point. So you now get this scene where they're hiding out in the mountains, and you have some Soviet soldiers kind of go up, right? And they go to this sign of in Arapaho National Forest, right? And there's like a sign about, it says like, yeah, founded by President Theodore Roosevelt under the Forest Service Act of 1905. The forest comprises 40,000 acres of virgin timber, one of the largest strands of the blue spruce in the American West, so forth and so on. But when the Soviet soldier, because he knows American history, they say, tell us what this is about. He doesn't read that. He basically says, this is about, he actually says, in quote, he was a great great peasant uprising in 1908 of wild Indians, right? I mean, he even mentions, I think he uses the word imperialism. Doesn't he use the word imperialism in that part?
Yeah, he says they were crushed by President Theodore Roosevelt leading imperialist armies and cowboys. The battlefield lasted all winter. More than 35,000 were killed. It was the greatest battle of the American West.
So
which, of course, yeah, is not true either. I mean, it's a mix. What's interesting about it, one, they have him read it because he supposedly studied English and he can't read this. It's interesting in that obviously it's a mix of some level of reality. Like, it is true that Theodore Roosevelt is this imperialist army leader that also did kill a lot of indigenous people, both in the United States and around the world. But this didn't happen in 1908, and 35,000, indigenous people were not killed in this battle. There are other historical reference points you can look to where similar things happen, but even there, like, the numbers of what they're talking about in terms of armed battle are not that high, right? So it's it's sort of like to make them, again, I think to Renee's point, like this is to make them look stupid to the audience. But it is also interesting in that what he's talking about historically is still, the facts of it are not correct, like to a precise point. It is the story of the of the conquering of the West, right? Of imperialist expansion across the continent and of the genocide of indigenous people. And so it's it's sort of like he's not wrong, but then by making him get some of these facts wrong, it makes that argument seem really ridiculous and silly to the audience. So yeah, it is a very interesting scene there.
So rabbit hole time. So the Arapaho were actually an indigenous tribe in Colorado, right? That got run out. But there is a fascinating story that I discovered that also happened in Colorado, about 200 miles from where that park now stands, where over 200 people, including Arabos and Cheyennes, were killed by this random like US Army troop who went in, led by this guy named Shivington, because they were told to go to Fort Laramie for protection. And if they failed to go to Fort Laramie, they were told to be considered as dangerous and problematic. And so this troop went in and basically massacred a group. There was 500 people like living in that field. And they massacred about half of them, ran off the rest. If you read the history books, they claim like this was the downfall of the Shivington guy who led it. But I thought it was very interesting because Sand Creek is in Colorado, right? And it's not far from where this national park is. So when I saw the name, I was like, there's a reason that forest is named what it's named. And so that was what I discovered, because the Arapaho Nation was very prominent in that area, and they got run off to Wyoming and other parts. But part of that was the Sand Creek massacre.
100%. And the creation of the national parks is a part of, Theodore Roosevelt is heavily involved in the seizure of indigenous land and, passing of different acts and so on to do this. And then, a lot of that land, there's land that becomes privatized, of course, and all of that, but there's also land that becomes national parks. And so, yeah, it is absolutely connected to Theodore Roosevelt and to settler colonialism and so on, and to these massacres. So again, it's really not that the guy's wrong. It's just that he's not reading the sign, and some of his facts in terms of like exactly what and where and how many are off. But it's the overall message. He's closer to being right than what's written on the sign.
And I think this is the thing with Milius, because Milius will, like, at one hand acknowledge that massacres happens of people, but the way people like Milius thinks is he believes war, conflict, and genocide are part of human evolution, which is a very Enlightenment kind of philosophy, if you really think about it. So he's really a classic Enlightenment kind of thinker. If you look at Conan, that's really what Conan is largely about, right? So this idea of like evolutionary steps, because what I find fascinating is this is the only time indigenous people are invoked, and we never see them, right? They're not, are they? I don't know if they're invoked again in the film, but we definitely don't see them physically, right? They're not. So it's like, America, yes, did wipe them out, or they're not here anymore, so forth and so on. But this is the kind of like theory of stages that Milius really gets into, right? And he's just sees it as a way of existence, right? And how people kind of grow to a next evolutionary step. And it's really disgusting, because this is how you defend things like colonialism and imperialism. And so it's no secret why he would believe in this kind of imperial kind of project. So this is also where we see the Wolverines have their first real big battle. And they all of them, like Jennifer Grey, like they're hiding at first. They don't really want to engage the 3 Soviet soldiers. But I think Jennifer Grey like falls, and they see them, and they go through this battle, which then leads to the one who they end up killing all of them, with Patrick Swayze having like this really big moment in the truck where he shoots one of them. It's like his first big personal kill. So it's like this next stage in his, leadership, but also in his level of violence, and what the necessary violence that happens, because he gets to watch this, Soviet Russian man, like, kind of plead to him through his eyes to not kill him or to have some mercy. And basically mercy's out the window. The Wolverine needs to come out of Swayze in them. And this is where you see the Wolverines become who they are. Because after that, it's just shoot up north, shoot to the sky, and these guys are now, enacted to become a guerrilla unit.
Jennifer Grey with the AK-47 in the scene, shooting one of the guys in the back, and like just she shoots it, and the AK is like flying all over, like shooting everywhere, basically, even though it's like point blank range, and she does get him. But yeah, I mean, I do think this is an interesting thing. I do think there's like kind of this. We'll get to this more as this goes on, but there's a very interesting politics of guerrilla war and armed struggle and so on in this film. But like the reference points for women with AK-47s in this era is like Layla Khaled again. Like, it's the PFLP, right? And so it's just interesting that you get this. And I think we moved past it, unless no, maybe it comes later. But there is a scene we probably won't spend much time on too, where Charlie Sheen's character tries to get them to do the dishes. I can't remember if he hands it to. I think he hands it to Layla. I mean, Leah Thompson's character. They're Tony and Erica are their names. He hands it to one of them, and she like shoves it on the ground, like starts going off, and it's like this, he's like, what did I do wrong kind of thing. And the women are like, no, this is messed up. Like, you're being patriarchal, right? So there is this interestingly kind of revolutionary idea, right? Whether you get within revolutionary groups of like within the armed struggle, the women move beyond these patriarchal or sexist, diminishments of what they can do. And they're like, I think she says, if you do that again, or if you say that again, I'll kill you. Right. And so there is this this place of like, look, these women have guns, like they're not going to put up with this shit anymore. Which I think also was a kind of libertarian, idea, although typically within that world, you have like strict gender rules within the kind of nuclear family as well. So I guess that depends on how kind of within the Christian, doctrine they would be around that, like the fundamentalist stuff. But anyway, just pointing that out.
So where do you want to drive to next? I mean, the film then kind of goes into, well, there's a couple of like big plot points before they go into like their series of guerrilla fighting. One is them, and Renee wrote this as a note. So as the film goes, they all have like new military outfits. So this next part is like they're kind of in the, what's the kind of like where you have, it's like a camouflage outfit with like they're in the woods, and like they are like not the woods, what would that be called, where they have the bushes or something like that, and they have like the bush kind of outfits, and they're hiding because they watch basically a rifle execution, or really a machine gun execution of men, right, of their fathers and things like that. So they watch that, they witness it, and it's also led by Ernesto Bella, Ron O'Neal's character. And the other kind of significant thing is one of the soldiers whose father, I forget, is he a principal or what does his father do in the film?
The mayor.
So
He's the mayor.
The
He's
mayor.
the mayor.
Yeah, so it's the one who is the student body president. His father is the mayor of the town. Yeah, I mean, there's probably a couple points to bring in on this. Like, there's, they're so they kill these soldiers, right? And they take their stuff. And there is a kind of funny thing, like Renee pointed to, of where did all this gear come from? I mean, the implication I think you're supposed to get is that because they're guerrilla fighters, they're taking the gear from the Soviets and then taking it, but it's not really shown. So it's it's like, how many outfits are the Soviets carrying on them? How many weapons do they have on them? But they just always are outfitted with progressively like more military equipment and more gear. And of course, that is a part of what guerrilla forces do, is to seize the equipment of your enemy, right? But there's a meeting with the mayor. So he's Daryl's father. He's played by Lane Smith. And the mayor, basically, they kind of lean into him, like, we know your son is a part of this group and he's a leader. And he's like, oh no, he's a student body president. He's a politician like me. And he's not the bad guy. He's not leading this. And there's like, well, then who is? And he's like, well, it runs in certain families. And so clearly the mayor sets up who's going to be the mass executed people from the re-education camp. So they pull out all the fathers from the re-education camp. And yeah, like, Jed and Matt and Robert, right? The three boys who are kind of the leaders, I would say, are all there, and they all watch their fathers executed after digging their own ditches. And again, like, this is where Arturo, or Aardvark's father, is killed, and they show him as the one actually digging the ditch and like walking over but there's never any recognition in the script or anything about the death of his father, which is like a fascinating, just like the racism really of this era. Quickly, one other thing is the Soviet soldier does call one of the other Soviets an African baboon, like, before they get shot, which I was just like, to try to displace American racism, like, onto this occupying force. So yeah. We could keep going.
Yeah, we can keep going. I think the only other thing, so then there's like this scene after the execution where where Swayze basically like takes his father's edict to not cry. And they're like in like a night campfire. He's like grabbing Charlie Sheen and like, they're just like, don't never cry again. And this idea of toughening up, they need to toughen up and
turn it into something else.
That's the lie. Turn it into something else, right? And the kind of ruggedness that needs to be invoked to become this revolutionary guerrilla force that's going to fight their occupiers, right? And there's one other thing. Go ahead.
The fathers are also all singing what, America the Beautiful or something like that as they gun them down, even though they're playing the Soviet national anthem as they execute them.
That's like their last like revolutionary act. in to counter this thing is to sing a song.
Then one other point, one other point about the mayor, one thing about him is, what I found interesting about this was you have a lot of tales of when the Nazis occupied parts of Russia and the Soviet Union. There's a great movie called The Ascent by Larissa Shepko, and it's about partisans who are captured by the Nazis, and one partisan who refuses to collaborate, and then another one who was convinced by a Russian to become a collaborator, right? So I found it interesting that, and I know probably Milius is very aware of that movie too. He's using things that happen in history and have been depicted in cinema very, very, very prominently, and he's kind of flipping them on its head, which I find really opportunistic and weird, and also how ahistorical the referencing is really pernicious because of what Milius is trying to be able to suggest, because this is what actually happened to Russian people in World War II.
Right. And the mayor is standing there as all of this is happening, right? He's standing with the occupier. His son is a Wolverine, but he's not being forced to like stand with the others whose children are also supposedly Wolverines. And he's doing the whole like he's sickened by this whole thing, right? He can't believe this is happening, but he's still standing there. It's the one thing in the movie that struck me as absolutely truthful, right? Because the politician will always save his own ass, right? Like they're always going to be whatever's going to save their own ass is the thing they're going to do. So he's not going to stand up for his people. He's not going to do anything. He's going to turn his son in. He's going to do all the things to make sure that he saves his own ass.
And this is the weird thing about Milius that I should probably point out now. He does not like upper class people either. There's an interview with Milius where he calls himself a Maoist. And this guy's crazy. This guy's nuts, right? But the reason why he calls himself a Maoist is because Mao, in his eyes, was right to execute. And I don't want to say that's what Mao did. I'm just saying, like, this is how he envisions Mao, that Mao took out the ruling class. Yeah, he says, there's a party. I want to take out the bankers, and I want to take out the ruling class. I'm a bit of a Mao, and not even a bit. I'm a Maoist in many ways. And I'm like, well, that's what Maoism is to you, which is also just crazy because Maoism comes from Marxism, Leninism, which is part of the Soviet Union. And I know about the Sino-Soviet split.
And how about he grew up in Bel Air, and his father was made a millionaire because when his father sold his shoe business, he got all the money. So they just up and moved to Bel Air. And as a child, he was sent to a very exclusive sleepaway private school in Colorado, right? Where at the time that he was attending, there was like 50 people at this school, right? It's since been renamed, but it still exists. And so his whole existence is as a top tier, like that. His whole existence is growing up in this space amongst rich people. Like the whole thing is nonsensical because you're going to kill your father because he's rich. Like, stop. Like you're here. You went to USC. Like your whole life.
You are a pipeline kid. You are the literal definition of a pipeline kid.
Exactly.
Yeah. One other quick thing on that scene to like turn it into something else and all that. In that, Robert C. Thomas Howell's character, who does become like kind of the darkest of the group, he's just in the corner holding an AK-47, like looking menacing. So he's not crying. His father he's just seen his father executed. And he's, oh, actually, no, his father was killed earlier. That's right. Because his father was the one who ran the store. We missed that point. His father ran the store and they killed him for arming guerrillas is what the charge was. And they were like, they just gave us the stuff. We're not guerrillas. And that's kind of like one of the moments that they take it on. So that's actually, I guess, kind of important is that his father dies first. And these other people around the campfire are processing, for the death of their parents and so on. He's already in the kind of dark place of like, no, this is war, and so yeah, anyway. The next scene, I mean, there's a whole, I don't know how much we want to get into like all of the individuals of this, but go ahead.
I would say we should just go through, I think, like, because to me the next big thing is how the occupation begins to fall apart, juxtaposed with the guerrilla fight. So because after that kind of happens, these moments, you really see a ramp up in their guerrilla skills, right? And them and their guerrilla action. Like they basically not just attack from the sides, the periphery of the occupation zone. They actually go into the occupation zone and do what will be called terrorist attacks by us, right? You have Jennifer Grey leaving bombs in restaurants and stores and things like that. And you also have scenes of them shooting them from like the periphery. So the film really becomes this juxtaposition for a good amount of time of this guerrilla action versus how well the occupation is going. And Ernesto Bella, Ron O'Neal's character, having these like kind of come to Jesus moments about becoming an occupier. Renee, I saw you were going to step in.
Mostly just thinking about, again, this idea that these 5 children who are not trained in any way, have done no military training, only have this experience of hunting with their father, right? Led by these 2 kids, one of which, is a little bit older, and their experiences hunting with their parents, being able to set up all of these different situations in which they are able to like start to destroy this occupying force from within, right? Like there's so and this idea, like in all of these scenes with Jennifer Grey, the occupying force is so busy flirting with the white girl that they don't realize that she's implanting bombs, right? They're so busy trying to like snatch her and pull her away that they just take the basket, and it doesn't occur to them that there's a bomb in the basket, right? And they're so busy chasing the girl that like they don't know that these kids are going to jump up from under the ground and start shooting. Like, it's just so, this is where I was really like, are we supposed to believe that like these 5 or 6 kids were able to pull all this stuff off? And then is this when the guy falls, the pilot who ends up joining that's later?
It comes a little bit after. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty soon after. There's a couple of things. I mean, to that point, their first big like military operation is also saving a bunch of people about to be executed on a road, right? And
right.
It's a kind of makeup for what they were not able to do. And also in this moment is when you get the beginning of the Wolverines, right? The kind of invoking of their name. And a lasting picture is of Aardvark with the AK-47, which if you look at it, Google Aardvark. I don't know if we have a picture of it. Google Aardvark or Wolverines, Red Dawn. You'll see the image because that's actually the popular image that's been used. People have like the T-shirt of him with the AK-47, kind of holding it up. And he says it, and he becomes the kind of symbol image. And this idea of their kind of football training, them being, the ruggedness that they've learned in like the outside wilderness, has now created this kind of guerrilla army. And they're doing like full-on guerrilla attacks, right? So then then it happens, you have what you said about Jennifer Grey. Yeah, that image right there. This becomes like the major kind of image. And I find it interesting that it's Aardvark of them that gets that kind of lasting image that's now literally been made into T-shirts and stickers. Like it's like if you go to one of these like conventions of like movies, you'll find this T-shirt. Like it's a thing that people are really into. It's part of like the cult around the movie. And they start the guerrilla war, and then it goes into the occupied territory where Jennifer Grey, the guy's like trying to like, hey, baby, come over here. I want to hang out with the American girls. I mean, it reads so World War II movie. But then also, it also reads Battle of Algiers, which I know another movie that Milius is familiar with, because Battle of Algiers definitely utilized a lot of like the women's role in the Algerian Revolution of leaving bombs in cafes and stuff like that. He's definitely invoking that kind of idea and using it in his film, but now making the Brat Pack become guerrilla fighters, which is just so fucking absurd in this experience. But it's part of this project. It really wants to make the Brat Pack, using the Brat Pack to show what a revolutionary force could look like in the US.
Yeah, so I think that's a good summary of all that. There's like this series of these guerrilla operations. None of their people die in any of these operations for quite a while. Like eventually they do, but like that's also quite an absurdity, is like they're always going up against superior weaponry and all of this. Jared made the point in the chat, which is, somehow they had all this intelligence as to when and where the convoys were going to be. Like, how do they know to come up upon the execution scene, or, know to set these, like, they set this false floor, like referring to like sort of Vietnam, of basically like tunnels, and pop up as I think it's Jennifer Grey's character is running away from some
That's
Soviets that
after the bike. She rolls up on the bike at the gas station.
Yeah, and she has an IED inside of the basket that she gives them that blows up with them, right? That starts them then chasing after her. And
there's
so
a
it's
Coors
like
Light sign behind them, by the way, at the entrance there. There's a Coors.
Good product placement. And so anyways, like all that stuff happens, and it's just like, yeah, they're starting to make a real dent. And so then there's this scene with, again, Ernesto Bella, who's like the Cuban military kind of leader. He's a colonel. And he's talking to Bratchenko, who really becomes kind of his primary kind of foil in how this should happen. Bratchenko, of course, is Soviet. And what was the name? Is it Brzezinski? Who's the
guy who comes later in?
No, I'm actually thinking of like the actual. I'll come back to it, but like there's a Soviet leader in the era who leads more of the kind of like occupations in this period. It's kind of, but anyways, I think that's kind of his figure, right? But the point being that, again, this was the part I referenced earlier. Ernesto says, I've seen this before: Nicaragua, El Salvador, Cambodia, Angola, and Mexico, but these are my men. And so referencing that, like, I was on the other side of all these. I've always been a part of the guerrilla insurgency. Of course, that's Cuba's history directly as well, both from their own struggle, but also supporting international struggles. And Bratchenko says, you must kill every one of them eventually. It's the same as Afghanistan. They'll never stop. Which also in the script, that's not what he says. He doesn't say, I'll have to go back and find what he says. But he doesn't reference Afghanistan. So that's an addition by Milius. Ernesto says, I was always on the side of the insurgents. I have no experience in these matters. It would seem to me, though, that you need to win the support of the people, as our opponents used to say in Vietnam, talking about the Americans, win their hearts and minds. Bratchenko responds, and they lost. And so this is kind of the back and forth. And as this is going on, then I think it's Jennifer Grey who drops a bomb in the Soviet American Friendship Center. and anyways, Ernesto at that point says, you were saying, comrade, like, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and it goes to this large point that's really going to be Ernesto's arc of that these revolutions really, and he's using the Latin American revolutions, they're always going to become deformed. I mean, it's a thing that's Milius didn't start. I think I mentioned it here or somewhere else. There's a Twilight Zone episode with Peter Falk where he basically plays Fidel Castro. And once he basically kicks out the Batista kind of character, he sees like the mirror of him basically going crazy and killing all of his compatriots. And essentially he just becomes like a nuts occupier. And this is a kind of rhetoric that right wingers use against these revolutions, is that they're always going to become corrupt. Go ahead.
Didn't Milius write a Twilight Zone episode? Is that the one he wrote?
Probably did. I don't know if he wrote that one. I'll look it up after, but I'm sure he did.
I feel like that was in the list of things, was that he wrote a Twilight Zone episode. So now
I'll look it up if he wrote that one. But yeah. But yeah, that's part of the whole kind of mentality that is really popular, right? They're going to become deformity because he seems to have like an emotional. He wants Bea to be kind of a emotional thing that you connect to, but connect to someone who's basically made bad decisions, which essentially these revolutions have been a bad decision, and it's led to basically American kids being killed in the United States, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, we can keep moving. Where do we want to head to now?
Just real quick,
Go ahead.
is this also where is it outside of that? Because I don't have like a time marker on here, but is this where he's saying like the children did this? It's the rebels.
No, that's a little later.
That's later. Okay, all right. So
But
I'll hold on that thought then.
I mean, you could go to it because it's all like there's a number of these back and forths, with them, and I don't think we'll probably need to go into detail on all of them. So I think you could just say the point you want to make with it.
So what I found interesting because specifically of what is said in this like little space of dialogue, and of course, this is the point where you have to, if you're watching a regular version of the movie and not like reading along the script as you watch, this would be subtitled, right? So they're having this conversation and he says, children did this. It's rebels. And he wrote back and he says back, what rebels? They're bandits. And then they say, every time they shoot, the revolution grows. And then he says, I know, I was a partisan. And the guy says, and now what are you? And he says back, now I'm like you, a policeman. And I was like, oh, shit. What is happening right now?
Yeah, but I mean, it's so absurd, this flipping of it all, of who's the occupier and who is the revolutionary. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I think that's just important to also anti-communists' ideology is this idea that communists fight for good ideas, but then when they come into power, they become authoritarian dictators, right? And so like that's the trajectory that Milius is trying to show, is that like they might have these slogans or think that they're fighting for something, but ultimately it will lead to this like naked repression, essentially.
Yeah, it's the totalitarian thesis, and we've talked about it, tons. The Hannah Arendt, and I mean, you see it popularly. Even people like Jacobin to these days use that heavily. There was a big argument on Ben Burgess's thing, even in the last 2 days, about him going into the authoritarian thesis again and using that kind of mentality and that really anti-communist rhetoric that exists. So the next, I think, person to bring in is we can now bring in Powers Booth's character, the pilot. Renee, do you want to maybe jump into that? Or Jay, I think you had something in your head. Go ahead.
Quickly, I'll just say,
go ahead.
You get the headline that it's now November. So I just wanted to say that like all of this has happened in 2 months at this point. And so, yeah, now it's November, but go ahead.
So she comes across, and this is Jennifer Grey, who's, I guess she's on watch or whatever. She's got her gun and she comes across this random man who's sleeping on the ground. And her way of verifying that he is a quote unquote American is by asking him what the capital of Texas is, which is like bizarre within itself, that's like, you're in Colorado. Why are you asking about Texas? But okay. And so this adult pilot who I guess got shot down out of his plane, I guess is the theory for this, joins this ragtag group of teenagers.
There is a quick like scene where you hear jets in the sky and you hear like one kind of like, so they're they were shot down.
They set it up. But the whole thing is like, again, like, so we're just gonna like this random person, now he's gonna join the group and he's gonna be helping them like set up these things. And it again to me points to how these kids, like the idea that they are capable of doing all of the things that they have been doing prior to this person joining, almost now becomes absurd. Because he's talking to them about strategy and trying to set up like a tactical attack, and they don't even understand like what he's talking about. So you get back to this idea of like, so these kids were able to do all of this, but you can't even like set up a real strategic attack. you know, based on what supposedly like, you know, military offensives are able to do. Like it's so absurd. Like the, you know, I don't even know what the word, yes, absolutely you have to suspend disbelief. Like you cannot watch this movie and think that any of it makes sense, right? Like there's no logic to how these things play out. And I went back to look at something and I noticed I skipped a couple of notes about like the things that they mention as things are going. So like they bring up that, you know, China's on the US's side, right?
Right. I
Which I
have this
thought
whole
was
speech like written down if you
okay.
want me
So
to go through.
yeah, why don't we, yeah, because this was wild. Yeah, this is interesting.
So, like, this is obviously a big plot device, right? You just drop in this soldier that then is able to explain to them everything that has gone on because, of
Right.
course, it
Right.
makes no sense. Like, how did people paratroop into, you know, the backyard of a high school in Colorado? I will add that the explanation that he gives is equally illogical in my view. We can talk through that, but it gives the narrative to the audience of what has happened that led to this. So he says the first wave of the attack came in disguised as commercial and charter jets, the same way they did in Afghanistan in 80. This is actually the part that was different in the script. Not the I don't know about the earlier reference to Afghanistan. He says Czechoslovakia in the script, right? So that's a, you know, an interesting reference to um he says only they were crack airborne outfits. They took these passes in the Rockies. So this idea that just first of all, like that commercial and charter flights are just going to come in and the FAA like has no idea sort of what's going on and they disguise it and sneak in anyway. Um he said so then Jed says so that's what hit Calumet, which is the name of their town in Colorado. He says I guess so. They coordinated with selected nuke strikes and their missiles were a hell of a lot more accurate than they thought. They took out the silos here in the Dakotas and key points of communication. One of them says like what? He says oh like Ohio, like Omaha, Washington, Kansas City. Gone? Yeah, that's right. Um and then it says, and then he says, infiltrators came up from Mexico. Like this is a, you know, and he says Cubans mostly, they managed to infiltrate the SAC bases, which I had to look up. SAC is Strategic Air Command bases in the Midwest, several down in Texas, wreaked a hell of a lot of havoc. They opened the door right there, and the whole Cuban and Nicaraguan army came walking right through, rolled right up here through the Great Plains. How far did they get? Cheyenne across to Kansas. Anyway, the Russians reinforced with 6 divisions, sent 3 whole army groups across the Bering Strait into Alaska, which would be easy to do, by the way. Cut the pipeline, came across Canada to link up here in the middle. I mean, that's just a huge, we're talking about like 7,000 miles or something like that. Anyway, uh, but we finally stopped their butt cold. The lines have pretty much stabilized now. What about Europe? I guess they figured that twice in 1 century was enough. They're sitting this one out, all except England, and they won't last very long. The Russians need to take us in one piece, and that's why they're here now. That's why they won't use nukes anymore, and we won't either, not on our own soil. The whole damn thing is pretty conventional now. And the question is, I think this was Jed or Maddie. What started it? I don't know. 2 toughest kids on the block, I guess. Sooner or later, they were going to fight. Stupidest thing. Maybe somebody just forgot what it was like. Then Jed asks, well, who's on our side? And he says, 600 million screaming Chinamen. Apologies for the slur. Response, last I heard, there were a billion screaming Chinamen. Pilot, there were. And then you know, they ask if his family's still alive, and he says they're trapped behind enemy lines in Texas, and he doesn't know, basically. But that's the whole, you know, setup that he gives. And so, yeah, and the 2 toughest kids on the block just had to fight at some point. Is like the so stupidest, you know.
But it go
Although
ahead.
there is that really great line that I always think of is that when the elephants fight, it's the grass that loses, right? And so if you really think about the broader picture of, you have these two empirical forces that are fighting each other for whatever thing that they're fighting each other for, but it's always the people who suffer, right? So I don't know that that was the craziest line. I mean, obviously, like his point in saying it is not like it's not like that. But there's also this idea, I know that's not at all what the movie was trying to say. I'm just saying, like, if you really think about how these battles happen, how these wars happen, it's always like people who are fighting over something that has nothing to do with the people, and it's the people who always suffer at the core of it.
I think the one thing I would say though is that there's a reason that the Cold War, I mean, so the line that you're alluding to, that metaphor, like it makes a lot of sense. The grass is the global south in this instance, right? It's like that
which
the
isn't
fighting of
mentioned at all in the film.
right. It's that the fighting of the Cold War happens in the global south. And so what I find most absurd about these kind of fantasies is this notion that World War III would play out predominantly in either the USSR or America, or the US, because it's such a difficult thing. I mean, like what they're describing is fantasy. This idea that you're
Literally.
going to get, 500,000 troops are going to come up from Nicaragua and Cuba through Mexico, and that 6 armies from USSR are going to come across the Bering Strait, and they're going to link up, and like and these tactical nukes or whatever take at, like, it's just, even by 1984 there was such a kind of I forget, that mutually assured destruction understood between the USSR and the United States, that like this kind of war scenario really was fantastical. But it's important ideologically for people to think that it's a possibility, right? Because that is really important to the maintenance of US imperialism and these bases all around the world, and all of this stuff, is this idea that like there's some kind of chessboard or domino theory. Again, domino theory was a big term, is like, if this state falls, then this state falls, then they can all fall. And that's what this film is like the kind of logical conclusion of domino theory, is that, oh, we've had Cuba fall, Nicaragua's about to fall, and it's just a couple more dominoes away, and then you have an invasion in Colorado.
And just real quick, rabbit hole time. At this point in actual real lifetime, there was a real budding romance between US and China, right? And the sticking point was Taiwan. And whether or not the US was going to continue to, enable Taiwan's war chest, right? To keep sending weapons and et cetera. And so there's some fascinating communiques between the US and Chinese governments regarding how they were going to deal with wanting the US to stop arming Taiwan, and the US saying, well, we'll be nice to you, China, but we don't really want to stop arming Taiwan, because if we need to attack you, we need Taiwan to have all of their weapons available. And one of the things that I came across as I was, doing all of my searching among things was the Taiwan assurances, which is like a real thing. Is like these 6 things that Ronald Reagan promised Taiwan it would not do as it was working, to solidify its business relationship with China. And one of those things was that it would never set a date for when they would stop arming Taiwan. And the other thing is that it would never like negotiate on China's behalf with Taiwan. Like, it's a very interesting time when you look at what all is happening between Reagan and China and like it's fascinating. But that is why it's important to point out that like China's our friend at this time, right? Because at that time they were trying to solidify that relationship. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, so this is what you're getting to is like the politics of the Sino-Soviet split,
Yep.
and that's what he's alluding to there, in suggesting that China would be on the United States. I don't believe that China would have actually been on the United States' side in some kind of confrontation at this level, but you do have a weird period where China takes a lot of bad foreign policy decisions, even supporting right wing, like pro US movements in like Southern Africa
Yep.
alongside the US in order to counter what the Soviets are doing. And so it is a weird period for Chinese communism of a like they have the split and then it becomes a kind of enemy of my enemy is my friend thing, and so they actually, and in some ways the Soviets had a prior version of this to some extent, right, which is the sort of the policy of peaceful coexistence with capitalism, right? And so it's like we will build our socialism over here and we'll do it, and we won't fight you directly, you won't fight us directly. And then that, of course, there's all the Cold War stuff that goes on amid that. And, early in the Chinese Revolution, people saw Maoism in China as the truly like revolutionary force, being more confrontational with capitalism, but it kind of flips in the 70s, really under Nixon, and Kissinger is very involved in this. And but yeah, I mean, we still have the Taiwan policies as a kind of relic of this. Of I mean, Taiwan is a U.S. backed military base along the outskirts of China, same way that South Korea serves a very similar role geostrategically too.
Right. And timing wise, this is also right in the midst of what they call the Afghan Soviet War, right? So, that started very, very late in 79 and was ongoing at the time that this was being filmed. And so
I think that's the most important touchstone for the film in terms of what's going on in the world, actually. Like, there's a lot of the scenes because, I mean, most of it's actually filmed in New Mexico, that especially the town scenes and the stuff around that. So that's why you get that desert look to a lot of it. The Arapaho Forest is in Colorado, and so they film some of when it's up in the mountains and that sort of stuff, it's in Colorado. But when they're down in the town, it's in New Mexico, even though it's supposed to be in Colorado. So it gives you this image of these Soviet tanks in a desert area with guerrilla forces fighting against them, which of course this is in the period where the US is supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan against, the Soviet forces there, right? And so it is this kind of like, and obviously there are those references to Afghanistan in the script. That's what they're trying to do, is like politicize against this idea of communist as these occupying forces that go into these other lands and indigenous people have to fight them off, which again gets to this like self-indigenization of all of these like white teenagers and that sort of theme within Milius's work as well. Yeah, anyway.
So what I found most interesting about that scene, the China thing definitely stuck out to me. And then if you think about Milius's affections for China, I think the political climate, because he seems to have such a negative towards the Slavic style of communism that comes out of, Russia and things like that in the Eastern Bloc, and he has such a hostility towards it, which I'd be very curious to find if there's any more that could be unearthed. But he has this kind of romantic vision of China, and then during that period of the kind of relation that had existed, I could see him really feeling very good, and that's why he wanted to invoke it. But what I found interesting was he said, hey, illegals will come in, but he did not include at all American communists. There was no fifth column, right? Though Jay tells me in the script there actually was a suggestion of that, which I find interesting. But there was no fifth column. There was no like homegrown stuff. I was like, John, bro, go all the way there, homie. have like the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panthers, they were like collaborating with the Russians. Like, really do it. Like, if you're really gonna go there, bro.
Yeah,
really
but then you'd have more than one Black person in the movie. That can't work.
Exactly. Well, they give me a John Reed character, you know, resurrect that vibe, you know, get it going. Give me some Weathermen, you know, like make it happen, bro. Like, really go there. I did find it very interesting he wrote that out of the script, and that he did not want to include a kind of American interest in communism, and also America's can't be right. And I think it's totally real. I think it's part of his psychology, right? That he wanted to kind of invoke that this can't really exist, or by that point, by the 80s, it all been stamped out. So it's insignificant. By 84, we took care of all those student dissidents who Milius went to school with. Remember, he was around that time. He went to school with these people. These are the people that he knows. He's around these folks. He's like, yeah, we've taken care of all of that. He wants communism to literally be a completely outside force that does not infect Americans at all, right? They don't have any interest in it, or the Americana. And of course, yeah, you know, having one Black teacher is enough for him to kind of represent all of Black mentalities of that day and age, you know. But that's what I found really the most interesting. Another couple of funny tidbit, this a little funny joke, was the Air Force wouldn't work with Milius because of how they wrote Powers Booth's character being kind of a bad pilot and like alcohol. They just wouldn't do it. They were like totally like no. And Milius like likes to use it as a story of how he didn't have help because he was trying to make the characters have multi-dimension and all that. I think the Air Force was just like, you're just weird, dude. Like, we don't want to really work with you on this shit. You're just an odd guy. Yeah, let's keep moving forward. So what's the next
one
part?
other
Yeah.
Well, just one point. So yeah, they do some actions with him. You know, they take Powers Booth's character out and he starts joining them, and you know, they shoot up an armored column and all that kind of stuff with a bunch. And at that point, like, they're getting really good, right? They're coordinating explosives, grenades, gunfire, RPGs. Like, they're now somehow top notch, you know, military with no training. But back at the camp, there's this other scene too where this I found interesting is he tells them he's like, you think you're tough for eating a mouthful of beans that you got? He said, or for eating cans of beans. He said, tell that to the starving people in Denver who'd give anything for one mouthful of the beans they got. They've been under siege for 3 months. They live on rats and sawdust bread and sometimes on each other. At nights, pyres from the dead light up the sky. It's medieval. Two things with that. Well, probably more than two, but just quickly. I mean, so one, like a siege, you know, this is reference to this. We're seeing a medieval siege, obviously, in Gaza right now. But the other thing about it is, like, this was a common thing in the 80s and probably a little bit before. But if you like didn't eat your food in the 80s, there was always this reference of like starving children in China or starving children in somewhere else in like the third world, right?
Africa, like starving children in Africa. That was like the big one that they would always.
Yeah. So there's starving children, you know, yeah, China, Africa, etc. And so you better be grateful for that food, even if you don't like it, even if you don't taste it, like clean your plate kind of thing. It's very big in the generation that we all grew up in. And but it's the starving people of Denver, right? And so like you're supposed to imagine that there are all of these places within the US. There's, you know, as he said, there's like these lines, there's parts that there's a free zone, right, where people are still the US, but they're like in the middle of, I think he says 20, maybe he says 40 miles from the free zone is where they are, but they're right in the thick of the fighting. But there are certain cities like Denver, which is not too far, in the same state at least, where people can't even get food, and so they're eating sawdust bread and sometimes each other and rats. So anyway,
It's just so absurd. And then there's also this really gross relationship between the pilot and Leah, right? Like this really like, why is this grown adult man who's married flirting with the teenage girl that he just met when he fell out of his plane? So there are these really like gross like conversations between them, and then when he eventually gets shot and killed, she's like very upset and she's never gonna love again, and like, it's this very like gross.
And what's weird about it is this is actually the toned down version, because in the script they were supposed to have a full on, I believe, sexual relationship.
No way.
Yes. And Leah Thompson said this is actually why she took the movie, which I found very, very odd. And she felt that like this was a kind of like really interesting character for her career to kind of, you know, be with Powers Booth in this kind of way. Yeah, because there's a scene in the film where they're out on a field. It's kind of like a more like not relaxed, but like they're kind of like in a non-war moment.
Football.
They're playing football, right? It's the big football scene. Thank you. That's right. So they're playing football, and he kind of takes a rest because he's like the older guy. And then Leah Thompson begins to ask him about his wife, and what's she like and things like that. And she's clearly flirting with him. And they really want to push the whole young woman flirting with older man thing. They don't want it to make it seem totally predatory, like he's like keyed on this young woman. So they want to kind of like turn it on her, but it still comes off completely icky because it's totally a fantasy of people like Milius, this kind of deal. But it was actually even much more nasty in the script. But the script people were like, it wasn't Leah Thompson who protested. It was the people in the movie. They're like, yeah, I don't think we could really do this. We kind of have to take this out. This is not really working. We're gonna get some negative feedback if we go there. The one other thing about relationships is, and this is actually a funny part, is Swayze and Jennifer Grey were supposed to be lovers in the film, which, for people who know the movie they would later be in, is kind of funny. But the reason why it didn't happen is Swayze, and this is known about Patrick Swayze, had a bit of a drinking problem. So there was definitely drinking happening on the film. And they said Jennifer Grey was smoking weed, and apparently they didn't get along throughout the film, shooting it. There's not a lot. People have said it. There's no specifics about why they didn't get along. And I'd be very curious on what happened then in Dirty Dancing later. How did they like repair their relationship? But apparently they did a scene that was supposed to suggest them having it, and it was a false take. And Milius says they were completely out to lunch, so he pretty much scrapped it as a plot point that Jennifer Grey and Swayze's characters would get together.
Rabbit hole time. So, so the script for Dirty Dancing was being written as Red Dawn was released. And they actually wanted someone else to play that role in Dirty Dancing, but apparently he couldn't dance, and they wanted to do the whole real dancing thing. And so the word from... So there was a delay between Dirty Dancing being, first considered and being put to MGM and accepting and actually going to where they were going to actually film and do the whole thing. It got somehow like, it got held up somehow with MGM. And I think there was something with money or whatever have you. And Jennifer Grey was very against them even considering Patrick Swayze for the role, but they did like a screen test. And according to the people behind Dirty Dancing, they were so like unbelievable chemistry on film together that they had to do it. They had to make those two the stars of Dirty Dancing. But I had the note because when I first pulled it up and I saw them both listed in the credits, I was like, wait a minute, was this before or after Dirty Dancing? Which one came first? And this one came first. And it was very well known as they were going into Dirty Dancing that they did not want Patrick Swayze, and he ended up getting the part anyway because apparently they tested so well together they had to do it.
That's hilarious.
That is. Yeah, we should say too, like Leah Thompson, of course, goes on to be like Marty McFly's mother
Mom.
as the younger version in all the Back to the Future movies,
The
and
younger and
like,
the older version, because all they did was do makeup
oh,
to
that's
make her
right,
the older
Yeah,
version. Hmm.
that's right.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I forgot that. Yeah. So, anyways, like all of the top, like, there's a lot of actors in this that have big careers, and but it's an interesting place in a lot of their careers, in that for
Yep.
many of them, it's
Yeah.
one of their earlier films.
Yeah.
And somebody said it in the chat, and I feel like it's worth saying out loud that what's his face? I just forgot his name now. The one who was in ET before this,
Oh,
CJ
that's C. Thomas Howell.
C. Thomas Howell, ends up playing blackface in Soul Man 3 years after this movie. He is Soul Man.
That's
Mm.
right.
The movie where he takes the pills and turns himself black so he can get the scholarship.
Which we totally have to do. I forgot about that movie. I forgot about that movie.
Someone mentioned it in the chat, but they couldn't remember the name, and I was like, "Oh, that was Soul Man." Yeah, yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I forgot about
Just
that
because,
movie.
yeah, I had to say it.
So
yeah.
the movie keeps pushing on, right? And you know, with there's a big battle with Powers Booth's character. That's like something that they don't expect. They go to the edge of like the free zone and the occupied area, and they end up getting kind of ambushed between a tank battle that's going back and forth. And you know, they try to assist the American forces, but in that moment, Powers Booth dies this big, you know, glorious death, and so does Aardvark, right? And it's like their first big blow, right? Like they've actually now have lost some people, which I find to just be wild, right? You know, like this like brand new guerrilla force is like so good that it took it this long, and the first one who dies is also the longest military soldier there, right? He's the first one that goes away. So you have that, and it kind of sets them into a new section. But then there's also some other revelations that come after that. Go ahead, Jay. You were going to say something.
I mean, just that, like, there's like a brief scene at Mr. Morris's house again for Christmas where he says that they're going to be sending maybe special forces and green berets, in the spring to help them out. Like the Wolverines have now gained this like national rep, is like kind of one of the things that is important as this liberation force. Morris actually tries to send more fighters their way. He's like, there's all these people who want to send their sons to go join them and fight them, and Jed Sweezy's character like rejects it. Like they don't bring in more forces, which is also really dumb from a guerrilla. Like if you're fighting a guerrilla campaign and you know what you're doing and you're being this successful, like why would you not want more people to join your forces? And then yeah, so I just said that because it leads into this scene where yeah, they're like trying to assist like American planes and things like this, and they get tanks end up sneaking in behind them, and basically they end up getting ambushed, and a couple of their people finally die. And then I mean this scene, so the scene after that is there's a Soviet parade. Yeah. And
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
this like counterinsurgency speech that's given in the hall, and the guy is like this new character who, you know, clearly is brought in because they're not being successful
His name is
fighting the insurgency.
Strelnikov. Yeah, he becomes the big person, which is played by an actor who used to be in intelligence. He used to be in
Mhm.
military intelligence,
Of course he
ironically.
was. Not a.
Mhm.
Is that ironic? Jabs in the chat. Is that actually ironic?
No. The so he talks about how there's people saying that their sector of pacification is growing. So he references pacification doctrine and how these are lies which have a stench of death and defeat. You can only win a war by exterminating the enemy. You need a hunter to fight the Wolverine, and I'm the hunter. He makes this metaphor about like if a fox kills a chicken, would you attack the pigs for witnessing it? No, you would hunt the fox. You must become the fox to hunt the fox. And so he's talking shit about basically they've also he tells them like you're not going to be doing reprisals against civilians anymore, which is something we should reference. Like every time the Wolverines are successful doing something, they execute a bunch of civilians. And of course, this makes like no sense strategically because you're just making people hate you more, and you're supposed to be trying to win their favor. And this is the kind of, again, this debate that's going on in the film between the hearts and the minds people versus like the brutal repression people, which is more, the Soviets are more representing the kind of brutal repression forces. Ron O'Neal's character, the Cuban, is more like we have to convince them to be on our side. We're losing this because they identify with these Wolverines and so on. So he comes in as the fox anyways. And that's just, yeah.
And I just want to, they make this big thing about defining like what a Wolverine is, this whole thing. And, I was curious about like what was the Michigan team like at this time, like in the early to mid 80s. So I looked that up, and they were doing fairly well in 82, 83. Steve Smith was the quarterback. He ended up playing in the CFL. So there's some interesting, things about this whole idea of like the Wolverines, right? And then if you think about also like Marvel, is it Marvel? Is Wolverine Marvel, or is it the other, or it's Marvel, right?
He's Marvel, yeah.
And so you also have, the comics, the comic book Wolverine, and, so there's all these different ideas that kind of, start floating around in your head about like, they're spray painting Wolverines everywhere. Where they get the spray paint from is like a whole other thing. Like they have all access to all these things that you're like, what? And, the idea that Patrick Swayze like dismisses that he's going to get additional help, it's actually something that's continuous to, like, they freed all those people. Where'd they go when they freed them? Like, why did they get more people to help after they freed them? So there's all these, like these little like quirky things that happens throughout the movie that you're like, what the, like, why'd they throw that in? That doesn't even make any sense. But that speech was very interesting with the whole idea of like, you can't kill the pigs for witnessing the wolf eat the chicken. And I was like, wow, like they're like really doing some mental numbers on people watching this movie, like for reals.
So the next kind of step is right after that, the Wolverines are in the mountain, and now they're now in their snowsuits. They're now in their winter outfits, right? It's now February, I believe, right?
Right.
I think we're in the February months now.
I had that really pissed me off. I was like, where the fuck did they get these outfits from? What's going on?
I guess the implication, I guess, is that they stole them, but like they almost look too. They look too clean. They look like they got them directly from the military store, so it just doesn't work. The suggestion that they would have stole them, unless they got it from a truck, someone wrote, you got to suspend your disbelief. Yeah, but suspend your disbelief is something that has to be built by the director and the writer, not by just me doing it on my own, right? Like, it's something that I really can't stand. So they're ambushed in the snow, right? And they, are able to defend themselves against the ambush, and they capture one of the Soviet soldiers. In the discovery of trying to interrogate him, and you see their like brutality and their cruelty kind of like begin as a guerrilla unit really get to like, form, which I also think is another thing about this idea that when you become a guerrilla, you just become a cruel Wolverine is like another like
you
bullshit
lose all
thing.
sense of humanity. Yeah,
exactly, right. They have a discovery that there's like a sensor, right, and the sensor like point is where they are, and then they realize it is the son of the mayor, the student body president, the class president.
Yeah,
they said he ingested it, right? He swallowed it or something.
He said made him swallow it. Mm-hmm.
He swallows it, so he's basically, the upper class kid, the one with the privilege, is actually the rat. So you do get your Lord of the Flies kind of moment here, where they have to then decide, oh, do we like murder and kill the rat and all that, right? So they, of course, killing the Soviet soldier is not that big of a deal for them. They basically line him up. He's speaking Russian, and they're like, all right, bruh. Like they have a bit of a moment, but they end up deciding to, shoot him. And, Swayze is like, should I kill the guy and all that? He's like really undecided. And, he doesn't know. The guy's begging for his life. And then C. Thomas Howell, who's now, he has like a mask on, like, he has the big AK-47. He kind of is like, I think looking a little, it's like he's giving off several different things to me. When I'm looking at him, I'm thinking, places like Afghanistan. I'm thinking all types of different places that he's trying to give off as a guerrilla idea. He shoots dude cold. He shoots
Right.
dude cold, right? It's
With-
like,
with
hey,
the-
bro,
and
you got to
and
go.
but he also just like he just fought, like he doesn't. That would turn at that distance to shoot with that gun would turn the body into mincemeat, and like that doesn't happen, right? Like he just quietly like falls, right? And there's blood on him and this whole thing. But also, what I thought was interesting is that the kid is one. Just like his father threw everybody under the bus, he promptly throws his father under the bus. He's like, my father set me up, right? He snuck into town. His father set him up. They made him swallow it. And then he's trying to explain, like, you don't know what they did to me, as if he was tortured in order to be forced to eat the sense, the thing that they're using to track them. And while Swayze is having this whole like internal debate is when the kid just walks up and shoots him. So now there's no one react, like no one's like, what are you doing? Like it's just like, oh, all right, well, I guess we don't have to debate about that anymore.
Yeah, there is a little. So yeah, like the Robert ends the debate with the AK, but yeah, I wrote down a couple notes here because it's like first the Soviet guy references like this violates the Geneva Convention, and Jed says I've never heard of it, right? And then they execute him, like Jed executes him, and then it says Matt then gets a little bit upset. So this is Jed's younger brother, played by Charlie Sheen, and he says, what's the difference between us and them? Like, what's the difference if we're behaving this way? And Robert at this point is like, I'll do it, and just pulls out his AK, right? He's like, I don't care about these debates. But before that happens, then Jed turns to him and he's like, because we live here, right? And so this is like again, is this, which I do think is a really important thing. Maybe we'll come back to it at the end, is this idea too of invasion and of people having a relationship to a place, right? And we're defending our spot here. And so like basically then is also this implication that the rule, which is very funny, right? Like it's very strange to us now in this context in which we're being told in this moment that the indigenous people who are defending their land with whatever they have, right, are the terrorists, right? Because they, don't care, whatever, all the excuses that are made up, right? And here you have Jed saying like, none of those rules matter at all. Like we're defending our land. The Geneva Convention, who's worse, like none of that matters. We live here and we have a right to defend it. Anyway, I mean, I do think like one of the things I said this last night in the discussion with Nora Barrows Friedman is like part of the reason why they don't show us Qassam fighters in the media at all is because being indoctrinated with stuff like this, we are all primed to identify with the Palestinian who is, shooting the RPG at the tank or throwing the grenade into the tank, right? Like that's what they're doing. The Wolverines in this are the US version of the Qassam brigades. Like anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a lot about Vietnam here, right? The idea that an occupying force will always have an emotional, at the very least, disadvantage to the people defending their own land, which is ironic because U.S. is a settler colony. But, in the conservative kind of mind state that doesn't matter, right? This is now the American, kind of land now to them. And if you think of Milius and his, his disposition in all of this, he thinks that this is America and this is our stuff, so we're going to defend it just like a Vietnamese person would, which is just absurd in it's a history of how it exists.
And it's also just a total, it's just a total lie about the history, right? Like this idea that now the European people are the ones who are indigenous to this land, and so they have every right to defend it to their core until they it's just so,
because they drank the blood of the deer, Renee. Like
he's now of the land. Don't you get it?
Wild.
So the movie then kind of gets to its tail end, right? The Wolverines are, they're a bit more, hardened. And there's a scene where they're trying to basically get some food. They see some stuff on the road. Jennifer Grey.
No. Wait.
What?
They don't just see stuff. This to me was like the big, are you fucking kidding me?
It's a clear ambush. It's a clear ambush.
Such a clear, right? Like the two boxes fall. They're going to ambush this convoy, right? And just as they're about to shoot the missile, these two boxes of food like they randomly fall off the truck. And this group of Wolverine militia people who have taught themselves and they've broken up this whole occupation and they've been such a pain are so stupid that it doesn't occur to any of them that it's a trap. And so they all just they send her down to,
but they're hungry teens, Renee. They're hungry teens.
Brutal.
This is where Milius wants us to kind of just switch off that they've been the highest level guerrilla force we've ever seen in cinema history, to now they're just hungry teens who are living in the mountains and they need some food. Yeah, I mean, I'm watching it. I'm like, all right, so when does the ambush happen? Because this is totally an ambush.
I was waiting for her to get shot.
Me too.
Waiting for was for the bomb to go off inside the box when she would eat. She would eat
the donut and the bread and roll her face.
And I'm like, and y'all, are we serious with this? I could not even wrap my head around that because in the end, again, it circles back to this idea, these are just stupid kids, right? They're just stupid kids. And so you mean to tell me that these stupid kids who couldn't stop for a second and think to themselves, they definitely threw these two boxes off the back of this truck, were able to create all this chaos and kill all these people and free people and do... it just doesn't make any sense.
So they are ambushed, right? After a little bit, they really drag it out, which I found really stupid. They go into the mountain, they start eating the food, and they're not ambushed by a force, they're ambushed by helicopters, high level military grade, weapons on them, military helicopters that basically take out the Wolverines, and they are there to basically blow them up, get rid of them. And this is one of their final battles. Jennifer Grey is shot. I think she might be shot first, if I remember correctly. C. Thomas Howell, believe is able to take out one of them with his RPG, if I remember correctly, but then he also gets shot.
No, he ends up shooting the gunman
off
of the helicopter, but the helicopter still goes because the three helicopters fly off together at the end.
You're right. Go ahead.
It's such an amazing shot that he shoots the gunman and the RPG flies right through the other side of the helicopter without doing any damage to the helicopter.
Yeah. I'm losing memory of the movie because at this point, I will admit, my brain would just I think I got really exhausted by it after a while.
I agree.
I was just like, dude, because even when it gets to the final battle, my brain was super exhausted, exhausted by it. Go ahead, Jay.
So So Jennifer Grey, Tony is her name. She asks Jed to kill her to put her out of her misery so that they don't like torture her or whatever because she's dead and she's fallen off the horse and she just can't go anymore. She's not dead yet, but she's dying. And he can't do it, but she's like, fine, just give me a grenade. And so he gives her a grenade and she says, pull the pin, right? So she takes the grenade with the pin pulled, and then it leaves, and you don't hear an explosion or whatever. And then the Soviets are there. They're dumb. They're talking about inflating the numbers, saying we killed, we killed 10 people or whatever.
12
And the
people.
guys, yeah, 12, whatever. And the guy's like, I've seen one so far because I think they found Robert because Robert does get taken out by the helicopter eventually. And then they come up to Jennifer Grey's body. They grab her by the hair to lift her up, and she has left the grenade under her body. And so once they pull her up, with the pressure comes off the pin and it explodes and blows up the Soviet soldier. So she takes out one more on her way out of this world.
Which is just so absurd that to think that the dead body could hold the pin together for like you can't be. It's just like, what is happening?
This was a line too. They said they must carry off their dead, right? So this is part of their excuse for why they're inflating the numbers, is that supposedly the Wolverines, this ragtag group, is pulling their dead off with them when they die.
So then it goes into the final battle. I mean, really, it goes into the final. So
so Matt sends.
Oh yeah.
So Matt sends Danny and Eric. Danny's like a minor character. Danny and Eric, I think that was his name. Danny and Erica off to the free zone. Erica being Leah Thompson, and so they send them away, and they're basically like, we're spent. Like, we've done all that we can do, and they're going to prepare for some final battle, but they don't want everybody to come with them. And so this is then Jed.
Well, someone has to tell the story, Jared.
Yeah, go ahead.
Someone has to. No, like that's what he tells her. Like someone has to tell the story. So we can't all die here. Someone has to go and like tell the story of the Wolverines.
Right, plot device. All right. So then there is the final battle. I didn't write a whole lot on this either, but I can give my summary and then you all can go.
Yeah, give the summary. I mean, all I have is, I think, is comments on Bea really for it, and then we can go there.
Yeah, he's writing a letter, right? And this letter is pretty. Do you have anything from that?
I mean, he's writing a letter to his wife. It's very poetic, and I mean, really, to kind of get into it, like, Milius is using him as a device that you're supposed to emotionally connect with, of a person who's now discovered what he's doing is wrong, or what he has done is wrong. He's going to resign. He's going to leave this. He's supposed to be feeling this great regret. He's like warding off communism. I mean, I do think it's like Milius's wish. He's like, I want to be friends with some of these, like, these Che types, and I want to hang out with these Castro types, because I think he likes them, because why? They do what he could never do, which is literally fight a fucking war. Like all the shit that he fantasizes about, right? These people actually did. That's why he likes Mao, because Mao literally won a revolution, and he's really into that. But of course, he doesn't like their ideology. So he's like, if they could like drop that, then like I could be their friends, and we could like, they could like, tell me the war stories, and I could, feel good about it. So Bea is doing that. But as Bea is writing this stuff, exactly. As Bea is writing this stuff, you have the two Wolverines come in and start their final assault, which, like, look, the reason why this whole sequence is ridiculous, and you can go through it, Jay, and is like, these two dudes literally do Rambo to a full-on freaking army, and they don't like they eventually do get shot up and get killed, but like the level of mayhem they're able to cause by like their selves is like absolutely freaking absurd. And I mean, they get to kill every single one of their enemies. You know, it's like the full action completion. They get to beat all the bosses except for Bea, which we'll talk about in a moment. But you know, like it's so freaking absurd. Go ahead, Jay.
I didn't take extensive notes on this part actually, because like you, I think I was exhausted with the film at this point, but it is true. And there's a lot of the escalation of their prowess as a military force is insane. It is actually like, take First Blood, right? It's like having like a set of Rambos that are all able to just devastate these Soviet and Cuban troops in ways that are just totally nonsensical. And even as we've talked about how some of them have been killed, like, they die either in these like scenarios where they do something stupid, or like, again, like Robert, when he just comes out and goes at the helicopter straight on with a machine gun. Well, it has like six circular machine guns like pointing straight at him and gets shot up. And so like a lot of them, as they die, it's kind of almost, it's absurd. But
It's Blaze of Glory.
yeah, Blaze of Glory, right? Um, and yeah, they go in, and I think there's other stuff coordinating at this time. Like there's the idea that the American troops are starting to advance more and so on, but they're kind of like leading the edge and taking out the leadership and so on. And the only thing is, there's a scene where Jed comes upon the Fox, again, like that counterinsurgency expert, and he has the drop on him. This is the part that this is one of the scenes that really pissed me off. Rather than shooting him in the back, as he should freaking do as a guerrilla force when he has him there, he just stands there and waits for the guy to turn around. And the guy, of course, turns around and machine gun, and they shoot each other, basically. I don't remember how Sheen gets shot in this, but maybe that guy shoots him first
I think he
before
gets
Jed.
shot before, because he's
He does.
carrying
He
him
gets,
for a while.
because he's like chasing them down the street. There's a train.
Yeah.
They jump on the train, and he
Right.
starts shooting at the train, and that's how Sheen gets hit.
Right, which is even stupider, because it's like Jed has just seen his brother shot by this guy, and he has the drop on him, and he waits for him to turn around and shoot at him before he goes
you
to
need
him.
to
But
see your killer. I mean, it's
exactly.
American movie bullshit, right? It's just
Yeah.
American movie it's the Dirty Harry thing. Like, you needed to know it was me, this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so they're both shot up, right? And then you see Bea, who has the drop on him, right?
Yeah.
He has the drop on him, and he can basically shoot them, but he opts not to. And this becomes the kind of like cementing of Bea's regret. He becomes the emotional kind of raisonnaire for us to kind of see this communist mission as like a really failed project. And I mean, I do think, granted, he's Cuban in the film, but he's a black man. Having a black man embody this concept is really pernicious. The fact that he made this choice, that this is who's going to embody this concept, that this kind of revolution is bankrupt and will only lead to the destruction. And his example is, the fact that he saves a couple of white boys, cornfield white boys. It's fucking absolutely insane.
And I just want to, it's in your notes, Jared, but you didn't actually say it, that this whole, like, before he waits for him to turn around so he can say, "You lose." And then they shoot each other. Which again,
Milius, the great writer, what a great dialogue writer.
This great human dialogue. Yeah, he talks like real people. So yeah, then it closes. Erica and Danny are in the free zone. Erica is telling the story, and is basically like, "Oh, do I have? Did you send me that one?"
I sent you
I'll
the
get
image, the partisan rock image, because this is the final image you see of the movie, and I think this is really important to something that I think it really sums up Milius's whole project, right? Like with this film, because what you see is, basically the Wolverines die, right? And there's this rock where they basically cement, and they basically let you know that, World War III had ended. They don't really say one day it just kind of ended, right? And it says, in this early days of World War III, guerrillas, mostly children, placed the names of their lost upon this rock, which something we didn't mention. There was a rock that's throughout the movie that they would constantly write the dead people and their families or their friends on, right? So it was constantly invoked in the movie. They fought here alone and gave up their lives so that this nation shall not perish from the earth. And I find this interesting because I think it goes back to Milius's big thing. He wants to create a kind of lore, a folklore for America to become its greatest potential. But to become its greatest potential, it has to fight a great war on its own soil. And it makes them a legitimate nation within history, because in their ideas, the great nations, the great empires, the great civilizations always defended their land at some point to a great invasion. And he uses these children as the kind of avatar to us to kind of sit through this coming of age nature of America, right? And it's really a nasty ideology, but this is that libertarian, rugged individualism ideology. And he just stamps it at the end of the movie. Like, this is what I'm giving you an example of America's rise. Now, what's interesting is the dude also had the freaking nerve to call this an anti-war movie, which, I would love for him to write a page on how this movie is anti-war, when it's just glorifying war completely. But this is like something that he would claim, that this is like a movie that's protesting against war and maybe wanting to avoid it. And he'll give you the movie maybe to kind of exercise that need for war. Maybe that's one of his thoughts. But for Milius, this was creating an anti-war film.
Well, this is his, because I did read, I found all these interesting notes about Milius, but this is actually him speaking about the movie. And he says, I think it shows the utter futility, a certain desperate futility of war. In the end of the movie, in spite of all that heroism and valor, the reasons and revenges on both sides and everything else, all that's left is a plaque, a lonely plaque on some desolate battlefield that no one ever goes to. So that's why it's an anti-war movie.
So, yeah. First of all, good comment from the chat. That line, so that our nation will not perish from the earth, is from the Gettysburg Address. So he steals that for that purpose. Somebody also brought up Plymouth Rock, which I think is definitely a clear reference as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of things in this. That one is that counterinsurgency is a kind of it is an unnatural, like, it is a challenging thing to do. And um you have this situation. I mean, what's interesting is that, in theory, if the Soviets went into the United States with all of these forces, they would be fighting an insurgency against the American government. But in order to do that, of course, you would have to be able to bring people onto your side, right? Which is like, and so they get into this place and they become an occupying force, all, thousands of miles away, among people who hate them. And it is, yeah, the references to Vietnam in the film are, of course, important too. We're still dealing with America, like, reckoning with the war that it did not succeed in and why. And so there is some commentary there about that. I think Milius, like you said, so it's like this weird way where you're both supporting the Monroe Doctrine, which is all counterinsurgency wars, right? Like, that we should fight against the Cubans, we should fight against the Nicaraguans, we should try to stop the communist insurgency in El Salvador, all of these things, because it's going to lead to this World War III scenario where all of our enemies kind of, join forces here in Colorado. Um, again, as you've mentioned to me, like in discussion too, and to me, like the location of the film in like the middle of the country is important of a kind of, even though Colorado, I don't think most people would consider it like the heartland. It is still in the middle, and we know that this also goes, I think they say Cheyenne and then over to Kansas City. So it's like a lot of kind of the middle of the United States that this is happening to. So um that also of course is totally illogical in terms of like like how does that I mean, it requires this mass invasion of Mexico, which I think is another really important thing in terms of the ideological work of this film, is to to support the scare against, that we have to militarize the border. We need a strong border patrol. ICE doesn't come along for many years, but like this is like the priming that post 9/11 you get, that then says like, look, if there's a threat to our nation, it is going to come through the southern border. And this film is like very proto that. It's pretty early on, because even though Reagan is kind of talking like that, even like a lot of this stuff doesn't really take off significantly until Clinton, in terms of like more heavily kind of trying to militarize the border and the border patrol and so on. um so yeah, those are just some things I think to add to the weird rugged individualism, the kind of self-indigenization that's going on in the film. Again, your point about just everybody being white who like matters in the story, or you're supposed to identify with. Like, one thing about people of color, I know we talked about their limited role, but like almost all of them are a part of the enemy in this film, right? So the Cuban is played by a black man, but a lot of the other sort of extras, I guess you would say, in the film, who are representing the military, are supposed to be from the kind of Latin American contingent of this communist force that is siding with the Soviets against the United States. And so I think that that part too, the kind of red scare, black scare element of the film and all that. But yeah, go ahead, Renee.
Sorry,
No, you're good.
I looked up. I was like, oh my Lord, we've been on here for a while. I got to actually go do some work. But because Intume again threw me headfirst down this rabbit hole about Milius, I want to make sure that I like note some of the interesting things that I found, which was really, he's just a weirdo, but like he's just like, there's so many odd things. And we talked a little bit about already, like, him having grown up in this really upper class family, and that he went to this very exclusive boarding school in Colorado, that he then went to USC, where he made friends with all of these other like really well-known people in the business, who all in different ways help to like solidify his his career, right? Because I mean, honestly, like the movie was terrible, like the everything. There was nothing about this movie that like, in like looking at it, I was like, oh well, this isn't so bad. Like everything, the script was terrible, the acting was terrible, like everything is terrible. And it's, in part because yes, it's the 80s and they haven't like, gotten a lot of this CGI stuff and all these other things done, but it's also because it's just not a good script, right? Like it's just not that good. But on top of that, there's also some very interesting things about his life and career outside of movies that I was like, oh shit, like, wait a minute, hold on. So for example, he worked for USC for a little bit, right? A little bit of time. And I'm going to drop this link in the chat, because this is the part of USC that Milius worked for in 2000, right? So this is the only page that explains who, like, first of all, look at the picture. Like, so this ICT part of USC, which is funded completely by the US Army, they brought Milius in to help them identify, like, it was, I can't even remember the words that they used, but it was basically to help them like identify different things that they could use in attacking other countries as like an offensive force, like his, like, and he was supposed to be this great person to do this because of all of the work that he did as a producer, right? So, right. So CTI is a Department of Defense university affiliated research center. If anybody watches Saturdays, y'all know I fell down a rabbit hole looking at all this affiliation stuff. Harnessing technology, creativity, academic innovation, and military domain expertise. Like, that is some real nasty stuff. And they brought him in 2000 to work for this part of USC. Right. Like, this is some wild stuff that he was involved in at USC, right? Then we had the attempted coup of the NRA, in which he goes into depth, actually, in an interview with CNN. And he talks about how all he did was lie to people for multiple weeks on behalf of this coup that he was behind with the NRA to replace the leadership of the NRA, right? So that is wild that this stuff happened. Then you also have him doing this interview with CNN in 2009. And the reason it took me a while to find the interview, because it's not like you can't go through CNN and find it anymore. Like, there's no public record from CNN of the interview. There are all these like random things, but I did find, like, I guess, like a back end, the text for the interview. And it's him talking about how shitty scripts are. So this is 2009. We're like almost 25 years beyond Red Dawn. And he's doing this interview and he's talking about like how terrible movies are now. But he says some things during this interview that really had my head like spinning. So he's talking about, you know, the quote unquote drug trafficking in Mexico. And this is his response to how he thinks this should be handled. This is a quote. "We need to go down there, kill them all, flatten the place with bulldozers, so when you wake up in the morning, there's nothing there." Like, that's what he says needs to happen in Mexico. To do. Right? Like, what? What are we talking about? He's talking about Rush Limbaugh. He's like, I would have him drawn and quartered for sticking up for these Wall Street pigs. He talks about, you know, being a surfer and, you know, this whole thing about, you know, Apocalypse Now. And he says that he always thought Vietnam was a California war. And he talks about, like, you know, when you're surfing, you're like by yourself and you're in your own like world. They send, you know, they have a whole bunch of clips, quotes from different movies. And he talks about like where the idea came from, right? Like, they're, you know, they all had their own rules and all of these things. And he says that he got sent to the school in Colorado because he was a juvenile delinquent. Like, this is his own take on his childhood, right? He says that you know, when he got involved with Red Dawn, that part of the writing was because, you know, he kept being told that they were going to have this great war with Russia. And he never got to have his war. He never got to participate in his war with Russia. So, you know, Red Dawn was his way of like creating this war that he wanted. He talks about loving his 44. It's just, I mean, it is wild about like how he really like kind of takes things in. Something else interesting he says, Another famous line in the screenplay, and he's talking about, I think he's talking about Apocalypse Now, is Charlie Don't Surf. He says that's his favorite. And this is him saying it. That line, he said, was inspired by a published quote by Israel's Ariel Sharon during the 1967 Six-Day War. Like, yes, wow. Like, exactly. Right? He talks about the line in Conan the Barbarian, to crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their women. Like, this is one of his favorite lines that he's written, right?
And people love that line. That line, if you go to the edgelords, they love that Conan line. It said so much.
And it ends, he's talking about, he says a couple of things, but at the end he says, there's no shame in the world, and without shame you cannot have honor. Our world is ruled by consensus now. There's no sense of honor. So like his idea that this whole right, that face, exactly. Like, he's so gross. But the interview ends with this, and I was like, they're talking about him feeling like an outcast, him being a conservative, the NRA, the gun control, whatever. And it ends with this quote of Milius. I've led a whole life behind enemy lines. I've been the victim of so much persecution, he says. I'm the barbarian of Hollywood. And that's how the article ends. This interview. I mean, the man is crazy, right?
Yeah,
and
100. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, to add a couple of things to that, it's funny. I forgot about that interview, but it was talked about in film circles for a little bit, and it was really bad on him and on CNN. So I'm not surprised that they hushed it. I totally forgot about it, but it was talked about by people. Like, did you hear about John Milius, just totally wilding out on the middle of a TV interview? And it became a bit of a talking thing. And yeah, they definitely wanted to kind of push that down. But yeah, Renee, what you've shown is literally this guy's his ideology. And what people really need to think about is how much influence he's had past that. Taylor Sheridan, who Jared has talked about, says Milius is one of his favorites. He says Milius is someone that I look to in kind of creating my whole kind of worldview, right? And how I approach making movies. I mean, now Taylor Sheridan is someone towards the right or a right wing kind of side. But even in the more liberal spaces, people who do action movies, who maybe they will always all cite Milius. Milius is encouraged to be taught in schools when it comes to screenwriting as someone you need to look at and someone you need to pay attention to. He has a lot of purchase. One other interesting tidbit is we have to mention his daughter, Amanda Milius.
Before you mention her, just very quickly, because that is also interesting, and she's in that documentary about him. But when this happens on CNN, and I couldn't find the evidence that he signed it, but I do think that this is part of his wilding out, is in 2009 is when Polanski, they caught the guy Polanski, who fled the US after he, pled guilty to having had the sexual assault of a 13-year-old. And he got caught because he was on his way to some kind of film festival, right? And so all of the industry came out to support Polanski, right? Like, how dare you arrest this man on his way to getting his award, right? And this was about the time when this CNN interview, all of this stuff was percolating at the same time. And so, we must also remember that this dude is deeply immersed in this whole industry and this belief of that, I'm a director, I'm in the movies, I can do what I want. You know what I mean? It's wild. And I am going to have to go in a little bit. So I want to make sure that I don't forget to note that there's a video game called Homefront. that was released by, I think, Sega. I think I have the note here. Sorry, Xbox. And it's been revitalized since this initial, but he is the writer of Homefront. And the whole premise of Homefront is Red Dawn, right? Like the Russians evade and and then they changed it to a different country. I think it's now Korea, right? And so there's this whole like, you know, you're the militia and you're you know, you're like this closet militia from this town and you're like fighting this battle. I mean, he really, at the core of it, he is a shitty rich kid who really wanted to go kill Black and brown people. And he wasn't allowed to because he had asthma. So like his richness did not allow him to surpass all of the rules, right, that would allow you to go kill Black and brown folks in other countries. And so because he couldn't do it, he has created all of these fantasy worlds within movies where he is allowed to present this life that he wished he could have lived. And he's been, you know, heralded for it. He was a wild ride. So in Tume, fuck you for sending me down that rabbit hole.
But you've done great work for the people. You've done great work for the people. You've done great work for the people.
I'm just joking. You know I love it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but this was a wild one. But I'm gonna stay and listen for a little bit. But I do have to jump off because I got some stuff.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I might, I'll listen for a minute and then I'll just jump off. But thank you for inviting me. Thank you for letting me ramble.
Of course.
Thank you for giving me another rabbit hole and some research to do. You know, that's my jam.
Yeah.
And I'll be in touch. We got some stuff coming up soon, so
we do.
So we'll be on that. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Renee. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Renee.
Yeah. So go ahead. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The last couple things, I mean, really is so his daughter, Amanda Milius, I think is good to bring up. She is a filmmaker herself, a documentary filmmaker. What she's most prominently known for is that she was in the Trump cabinet for a while in the first Trump administration. I can't remember what she did specifically, but she also did this documentary called The Plot Against the President. And it's, you know, it had a big controversy because I think Amazon Prime took it down and so forth and so on. But she is part of that circle of people who are of Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, you know, so forth and so on. She's part of that whole grouping of folks of what some would call the new right. There was an article about it, and there's a lot of she's interviewed and spoken about a lot as being like a really big figure within that, you know. And she's definitely someone who really invokes her father. She like really is big into her dad, and like her dad was this great man who was blacklisted by Hollywood, which is also something that Renee did kind of point out, but I want to double emphasize that like Milius believes he was blacklisted, partly like starting with Red Dawn. Like Red Dawn was kind of like how, you know, he began to be blacklisted from Hollywood, though. I mean, he still did have a career. He there's many projects he's been a part of, from like the Rome TV show. Go ahead.
Yeah, he wrote like 30 films. Like,
right.
Yeah.
This idea that, I mean, maybe because he couldn't direct again, but also like he's not a very good director. So I think there's another part of that as well. But
he still directed like 13 films too. So it's not
exactly.
Like he didn't have like,
yeah. So like, you know, he wants to paint this kind of narrative that there's been like a reverse McCarthyism against the conservatives in Hollywood, and that he is like public enemy number one in that. And it kind of feeds into his whole, you know, rugged individualism, the great rebel narrative he wants to kind of set about himself. A couple of last things about the film is like the film didn't do great box office wise. I mean, it doubled. It wasn't a failure. It doubled, but it was really popular among certain sections of America. It has a huge cult following amongst action movie lovers. It's not just like right wingers who love it. Like, this is one of those movies that I've always had real difficulties with, like, you know, film bros, because they're one of those, oh man, it's just a fantasy movie and things like that. And they do this what they would call ironic watching and things like that, you know, and I'm like, dude, this is, like, you know, completely absurd. And it kind of shows the kind of bankruptcy of a kind of certain kind of film culture, where they want to embrace things that have real pernicious elements to it, but then it'll say, oh, it's just camp, and they use camp as a way to like deflect what the films are actually doing here. Because if you look at it based on what Milius says, this is really ugly, nasty, pernicious shit, right? Like, it's really, and it's like, it is, I mean, it's funny, Jab hit me, he says, where do you think this would rank in the imperialist rank? And I said, I don't know what knocks it off, man. Like, I could see a lot of 1 and 1As, but like, if we did a list, like, there's no way that this doesn't like go to like the fullest levels, to like the Lenny Riefenstahl levels. I mean, to me, Delta Force would be the only 1A probably that could probably measure with it, you know, or
And there's
Rambo
like
3. And go ahead.
yeah, and it's like, how do you rate to like, because it's some, I don't know how to do this metric exactly, but like one of the things, and we'll talk about it as we do some more of these films, is like, I know that we've all said this is a bad film, and it is, but it's also like, it has a certain box office, you know, level of success. It has this cult following. It has all of these famous actors in it. It had a big kind of cultural purchase, and it's influential in a lot of ways, and it's politically influential too. I mean, I would put probably like the later, you know, Rambo's 2 and 3 ahead of it, because they were so much bigger and had way more successful box office wise and so on. But yeah, it's up there because you know, in terms of, if you're just thinking about like Delta Force, I think is even more racist and just wild and pernicious in certain ways, maybe more pernicious even ideologically. But um it's also a really bad film. Like, this is like not as bad of of a film as that is. Like, that is terrible.
Yeah,
Um
Delta Force, you just laugh at. But that, I think that's part of it, though. I think the fact that some of these movies are bad, there is this way that people do, oh, I'm just watching a bad film. And you know, and they use it as a kind of buffer to enjoy really nasty, pernicious shit. I mean, same thing with like Revenge of the Nerds, right? They write off the sexism, misogyny, and basically pro-sexual assault narratives that exist in Revenge of the Nerds, all under the umbrella of camp. And that's just ridiculous. First of all, like, I mean, I'll post Revenge of the Nerds to the side. I don't believe Red Dawn is meant to be camp. It might come off as camp because it's just bad filmmaking, but Milius is not trying to be campy. It's also a
no,
misunderstanding of what camp actually is.
any of the comedy is unintentional in the film. It's not a film that's trying to be like, I know camp can come off like unintentional comedy, but it's not really. Like, there's an intentionality to creating something campy. Um, you know, yeah, anyway, and somebody said, yeah, we will do Delta Force for sure, because it is like
Yes.
super pro-Zionist,
I
and we
mean,
have
it's
to
not,
talk about
it's
like
pro-Zionist also because it's made by 2 Zionists. I mean,
right.
they were very explicit Zionists.
Yeah. Another thing that we didn't talk about really that I think is important too is when you think about the influence of films like this within the right, and it connects again with like the First Blood watch and so on, is the connections to survivalism, to like what we would call now prepper communities, to militias, right, which take a big rise in the late 80s and into the 90s, right? And so this idea of, you know, we need to be able to live off the land, we need to be able to defend ourselves, defend our, and that's very much within a white sense. Like, these are almost 100% white communities that kind of participate in this activity with a kind of right-wing ideology that is also very much informed by movies like this, that there is a fear that we have to have of illegals, right? That whole notion of, they talked about that, of this illegal invasion basically as being a key component of this war. So that there's a lot of political resonance into these kind of fascistic or proto-fascistic formations that are also like super ready for violence, and keep themselves like go train on the weekends type stuff with their buddies, as well as hunting and all kinds of other stuff too.
One thing I do want to this point. So I watched the interview with Powers Booth, and he was at the premiere of the Milius documentary, and he was basically, raving about how great Red Dawn is an experience and how he thinks the film is great. And one of the reasons why Powers Booth says the film was great is because he says he felt it was prescient because of what happened on 9/11. So he invokes 9/11 as saying Milius had his finger on the pulse of what would then happen later. We would have a kind of version of that. So Powers Booth, exactly, eye roll, Jay. So Powers Booth, I mean, the interview is nasty. He's like, yeah, I've hung out with John. He has this great gun collection. It also just shows you this idea that, there's a lot of wild folks running through Hollywood, man. They have a plurality. And look, these liberals are they might be, they're uncomfortable when it's bad publicity, right? Or when it's like maybe someone like Milius acts a little bit too reckless. But if it's just a general ideology that kind of runs around, they're really okay.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna go through stuff from the chat. First of all, let's see. Thanks, Kelly, for the super sticker. Appreciated. And then thanks CZ Lion Dad for the super question. So his real name, we had it, but they're all Estevez's, and
Estevez.
including Martin, by the way. Like Martin, his name,
I forget the first name.
So Martin is Ramon Antonio Gerardo Estevez.
Carlos.
And then
Charlie
Charlie Sheen, Carlos, and then of course Emilio is the one that kept the Estevez, right? Charlie's brother. But yeah, very interesting too that, yeah, anyway, white Latinos, man. Yeah, so Jab said 1 Rambo, 5 to 6 Wolverines. How does this country ever lose? That's right. I mean, and always again the references to the Green Berets, right? Like this is just this romanticization of U.S. militarism, and I think that's another point we probably didn't talk about enough with this, is the importance for films like this when you get to like the wars that Bush would, I mean, also the dirty wars of the era that they need to recruit people for, but especially as they get to the first Gulf War, the first Iraq War, around 89, 90, that there is all of this work that is being done to prime young men to join the military. And this is one of them, right? Like you need to go fight these wars on their soil, so you prevent them from fighting a war on our soil, right? And that kind of logic. Somebody said Red Dawn was the first PG-13 rated movie according to YouTube trivia. Yeah, the PG-13 thing comes around this time. Do you have anything on this, Mtume?
Yeah, so it was after Gremlins and another Indiana Jones. I guess it would be Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom.
I think it's Temple of Doom.
There was a kind of a backlash because they were PG movies. So actually Spielberg created it, basically saying, can I make a midpoint kind of movie, because Red Dawn basically was like the producers of it said, let's do it, because they knew an R rating would totally destroy ticket sales. So yeah, it was the first film to be invoked with it. It was created because of Gremlins and Temple of Doom, but Red Dawn was the first one to have it kind of stamped at the beginning of its release.
Right on. Somebody asked if we could eventually compare it to the remake. I started to watch the remake, but I didn't get very far into it. I mean, obviously they used the DPRK to replace the Soviet Union, which I think is even more of an outlandish idea. But I didn't go too far down that road. I think you said that Milius didn't like the remake.
He hated it. He thought it was really bad. I guess there's a reference that China backs up the DPRK in it. I haven't seen the film like really attentively. So, and he thinks that's wrong. He says literally, quote, they sell stuff to us. I mean, he's just a very strange. And then he said it should have been Mexico. So basically he goes back down to this idea that Mexico is the primary contradiction, if I use a Marxist term, in his eyes.
Stephen brought up that, it's the same vibe as the Star Wars rebels are supposed to be Viet Cong and Americans are supposed to identify with that. Yeah. I mean, this is something I was talking about too, is like, I do think because of how we are, the mythologies that we're taught about the United States and the American Revolution, and like, you're not supposed to think about America as an empire or about America as the dominating force. And so, like, in some ways with the Vietnam, this becomes like this outlier of saying, like, we kind of lost our plot. Like, yeah, we were trying to prevent domino theory, we were fighting communism, but like, we don't really know how to fight these wars of, pacification or so on, which of course totally denies the history of what settler colonialism is and was. It denies the history in the Philippines and all these other instances, and before and after. But it's Americans are primed to identify with the underdog, right? Which again is my point of why we don't see videos of the Qassam fighters, because they know that people would see that and be like, they're fighting against the tanks that are coming into their town. Like, of course they have a right to do that, right? Um, anyway, um, what do we think about the Charles Bronson Death Wish films? They're definitely like a right-wing vigilante
100%.
revanchist.
100%. Especially
Yeah.
and then I mean they always were, and then when they get to the canon years in the 80s, it just goes to all kinds of absurdity. That's like really, if you should watch, if anybody hasn't seen the canon film documentary, it's great. Only in that it's great in the sense of you get to expose how absurdly awful those guys were, and the stuff they did in the Death Wish movies. Oh man, what they did to some of the actors, especially the women actors, just terrible.
Yeah. Somebody said Eric Prince. He sounds like, this is Milius, sounds like an Eric Prince psychopath. That was during Renee's breakdown. Yeah, and this was the point too, that about like the militias and the paramilitary, and these kind of like entrepreneurial forces that support that kind of stuff too. Eric Prince also is in that realm. All right. We're letting work interfere with our important business. It's tomorrow already. Yeah.
I know we've been here a while
Um,
today.
Thanks again for the super chat, ZZ Lion Dad. Can we elaborate on the creation of the Green Berets? I think that's why they exist as a pathology mythology. What we'll do is when we do Rambo, the second Rambo, I think we can maybe do a little bit of
Yeah.
a deeper dive into this. But not for me, I'm not even talking so much around the creation, although I think that's an interesting question and we should delve into that as well. But just how much it was promoted in this era, particularly in the 80s, of like, how do we get Americans to re-identify with being in the military as being a badass thing to do, and to become like the elite of the elite, and to learn how to do all this awesome shit like Sylvester Stallone and Chuck Norris and all of these people can do, and the Wolverines, right? As opposed to this, like, nobody really wants to fight in Vietnam, and the draft is bad, and we don't want to be involved in this, etc. And so it's like, to me, I see it as really important in kind of the propagandistic flipping of the script of this point, in which there was a a feeling, particularly by the ruling class and by prior generations of veterans, that like in the late 60s and 70s, people didn't want to serve their country anymore. So the 80s is the era I feel where they're like, we have to make it really, really cool. The coolest thing that you can do to be a soldier and the elitist of the elite. We have to talk about all of these special forces, the Green Berets, the Army Rangers, the Navy SEALs, right? The Marines. And so you get that a lot in the 80s. We will do G.I. Joe cartoons at some point. Like it is a big, big thing. But yeah, so we will delve more into the creation, though. That's an interesting question, too. And then is Toy Soldiers a remake of this movie? I don't know if
No,
I've
from the
seen
90s. That's the 90s with like Sean Astin of the Latin Americans who take over a boarding school. I don't think it's not a remake, but I think it's Red Dawn is probably something that at least convinced a studio that would be a good movie to make. And that movie was very popular. It was very popular.
Yeah, I can't remember if I saw it or not. If I saw
Oh
it,
yeah,
I would probably
I used to watch that
recognize
movie
it.
all the time because I was more of a teenager then. So like
Mhm.
it was more referencing like the time that Red Dawn. I was 4 when it came out, so it was like I was super young.
So early, well, no, we didn't mention Conrad. Yeah, I mean that is so.
Yeah,
This is, I guess, this is one thing we should say about Milius is that he has like he's cited as having this deep fascination with the classics and like wanting to do Homeric kind of stuff and these which again it's such a right wing thing to be like obsessed with the classics, which is like this curated canon to build this Western civilization, mythology, really. But of course, Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, is this book about going into the jungles of Africa and so on. And it's a big piece of what he's doing in Apocalypse Now. And he also says that in the documentary. He talks about how he had some film professor or maybe it was a creative writing professor, I don't know, who was like, many people have tried to make a Heart of Darkness film, but nobody can actually do it. And so he took it as this challenge that he would be the one to make the Heart of Darkness film. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
no, I mean it's spot on about him. I mean you know, things that come within the European Enlightenment tradition. Milius sees himself as, if not only invoking it as like the heir to that kind of throne, but he does it through movies. So he sees something like Red Dawn and Conan, adding to that lineage of it. Though the Apocalypse Now thing is really interesting because Coppola and him didn't necessarily get along that much doing it. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But I mean, Apocalypse Now has a lot of problems, of course. But like, it's very interesting to see their kind of ideological clash over a lot of that stuff.
Somebody asked, "Is this a record for Mac?" Almost 4 hours in. Maybe the
Yeah.
records held by prior M2May collaborations when
Damn.
we were doing
And this is gonna
the
get
Cedric
blamed on
Robinson
me.
stuff.
This is gonna get blamed on me.
No, no. There was 3 of us. And we all had a lot to say,
Yeah.
absolutely, and it was one of those films. But we are now double the length of Red Dawn, so we
Yeah.
probably
We
should
should
bring
stop.
it to a close.
So the one thing you should do as we stop is you need to put up the Jennifer Grey photo that we have because it was not used, just so we could have the lasting image of this era of filmmakers of actors, And this is a lasting image of the 80s Brat Pack crew.
I got it. Hang on.
It's so funny. It's just so funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of this in the film, like her and Leah Thompson with AKs and machine guns and stuff like that, just
It's
mowing
wild.
people down, mowing down
People down.
Soviets.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right.
All right, y'all.
So we'll see you next week. I have a request out to somebody, but maybe we'll confirm it later today. Also
Okay.
on Thursday, gonna have the Irish barrister Frank McGuinness, who is awesome, to come on and talk about the death of Zionism and his legal work and all that stuff. So I'm looking forward to that. And let's see. I think that's it. Check out the Nora interview we did yesterday. If you haven't seen it, it's really good. She did a great job.
Yeah, and I'll
yeah.
be dropping this week an interview with Dwayne Monroe, who's been on here. That'll be coming out
Awesome.
Thursday and Within Our Gate. So check it out.
Check that out. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Peace.
Peace, y'all.